Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel way back, like way back, to the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, a period so apocalyptic that even the historians can't agree on what really happened. Trade routes gone, cities burned, languages lost, entire civilizations just vanished, like somebody tripped over history's power cord. You're about to be dropped into that smoking crater, not as a king or a soldier, but as someone who's just trying to stay alive while everything familiar goes up in flames. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing barefoot on warm dust, staring at the collapsed wooden frame of what used to be your neighbour's house. There's smoke drifting from the fields again, and the smell of burnt grain hangs in the air like a warning. You've heard rumours for weeks, ships never arriving, scribes leaving town under cover of darkness, and now this. Your city isn't just having a bad harvest or a border skirmish, it's done. The Bronze Age isn't limping to a dignified end, it's being punched in the teeth and set on fire. You live in what was once the bustling eastern Mediterranean, maybe near Ugarit or Mycenae or Hattusa. Take your pick. They're all falling apart at roughly the same time. It's the 12th century BCE, and you don't know it yet, but you're witnessing one of the greatest civilizational crashes in human history. You also don't know the term Bronze Age, because you don't think of yourself as living in a particular age at all. You just know that the bronze your father used to trade for is gone, the tin shipments dried up, and the blacksmith hasn't opened his forge in weeks. There are still a few guards in the street, but they don't look official anymore. No uniform, no pay, just swords and grim expressions. The palace gates, once sealed tight with seals and protocol, hang crooked. No one really runs things here now. The high priest left 3 days ago, taking what was left of the temple's silver with him. You remember when the festivals lit up the town square, when music echoed through the markets and scribes scribbled furiously to record every shipment, every tax, every omen. Now, the market's deserted. A goat wanders through, chewing something from a toppled stall. It didn't happen overnight. Sure, there were earthquakes, massive ones, enough to knock entire cities flat. Droughts too. Some say even volcanoes, though the timeline is still fuzzy. The sea people, whoever they were, swept in like a tsunami, torching cities and cutting off coastal supply chains. The Egyptian pharaohs tried to stop them and barely succeeded. The Hittites, gone. Mycenaean palaces, burned. Even mighty Babylon staggered. You'd think with all the monumental stonework and gleaming bronze, these civilizations would have lasted longer. But complexity is a fragile thing, and when it cracks, it shatters. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some scholars think this all kicked off with a technological leap backward. Yes, backward. The very thing that fueled this world, bronze, relied on tin, and tin isn't exactly lying around in everyone's backyard. It came from far away, maybe as far as modern Afghanistan, or even Cornwall in England. That's a long supply chain for something you desperately need to make weapons and tools. Cut off that supply, and your bronze-making days are over. People still argue whether it was resource scarcity, over-reliance on fragile trade routes, climate change, foreign invasions, internal rebellions, or some chaotic mix of all five that toppled this interconnected world. Honestly, the scholarly debate is like listening to a group project where no one did the reading. So here you are, standing in the heat and ruin. You have a linen tunic, a family recipe for barley cakes, and maybe a cousin who knows how to catch fish without getting stabbed. That's about it. The city granaries were emptied weeks ago, either looted or rationed into oblivion. Water from the cisterns is getting murky. You've considered leaving, but where would you even go? News travels slowly, mostly by wandering traders or refugees, and all their stories sound the same. More fires, more ruin, more missing people. One of the eerie things is how fast things stop working. No taxes, so no government. No trade, so no craftsmen. No letters, because the scribes fled or died. Even the gods feel distant. The temples are cracked. The altar's cold. You offer your last bit of incense, but part of you wonders if the gods left too. That old priest used to say the gods lived in the order of things. Well, the order's gone. Maybe the gods left first. But here's the thing about people. They're stubborn. You're still breathing, still cooking food over fire, still watching the sunrise. It's not pretty, And it sure isn't glorious, but it's survival. The elite classes are the ones hit hardest. Kings and generals with no troops, scribes with no patrons. But regular people, farmers, herders, basket weavers, they start adapting. They retreat from the cities, return to the countryside, build homes from mud brick and thatch. You strip nails from fallen buildings. You dig irrigation trenches with stone tools. You form tight-knit communities, guarded by wooden fences instead of palace walls. And oddly, that's where the future starts. Not in a throne room, but in a smoky hut with 5 families huddled around a lentil stew, figuring out how not to die. You don't know it, but your kids, or your grandkids, will eventually lay the foundations for a whole new world. A world with different languages, smaller governments, and a cautious relationship with ambition. The Bronze Age didn't just collapse, it reset, violently. You pick your way through the ruins, stepping over pottery shards and broken sandals. The sun's dipping low, casting everything in gold. A quiet breeze stirs the ashes of a world that thought it was eternal. You can feel it already. Nothing's coming to save you. There's no empire waiting in the wings. Just you, your people, and whatever you can scavenge before night falls again. You're not special. That's the first thing you have to accept if you're going to make it. You're not a warrior hero from some dusty epic, or a clever merchant ready to rebuild civilization with nothing but charm and sandal leather. You're one of the nobodies, the faceless thousands history barely remembers. No monuments are carved for you, no poets chant your name, but you still wake up every morning, you still draw breath. That alone makes you part of something remarkable, the scrappy, sweaty survival of the ordinary person after everything else has collapsed. Let's be clear, this isn't post-apocalyptic in the glamorous leather jacket and makeshift crossbow kind of way. This is messy, desperate survival. The kind where your biggest achievement today might be finding clean water or patching a roof with woven reeds before the next storm. The palace guard who used to march down your street, he's now begging for food 2 villages away. The merchant who sold cinnamon and dyed cloths, she's herding goats on a hillside and pretending it was always her dream to live off the land. All the rules, roles and social statuses have been upended, and in the silence that follows a collapse, the people left standing are mostly the ones who never relied on those rules in the first place. You were probably born into this mess. Or if not, you were young when the ships stopped coming and the world stopped making sense. No more shipments from Cyprus. No more Egyptian scribes cataloguing offerings at the temple. No more bronze axes traded for sacks of grain. Your family used to buy tools from metalworkers. Now your uncle makes them out of stone and calls it traditional craftsmanship. Though you're pretty sure he made that up. A good flint blade gets passed around like treasure. Broken ones get melted down or reshaped until there's almost nothing left but jagged edges and sore fingers. You're lucky if you know how to grow food, or fish, or tan a hide. These are no longer humble, overlooked skills. Now they're survival codes. The people who once held the power, the priests, the scribes, the palace accountants, they're fumbling through this just like everyone else, often worse. You trade with your neighbours, sometimes for food, sometimes for shelter, sometimes for things that feel small but aren't. Firewood, a pair of sandals, information. Gossip spreads faster than anything else, mostly warnings. Which roads are dangerous, who might still have salt, which gods are still answering prayers, if any of them are. You watch a child, barefoot and smeared with ash, chase a chicken through the dirt. She's laughing. Somehow, even with everything burning or crumbling, kids still laugh. That's one of the weirder things about life after the collapse. It's not all misery. There are moments of peace, even joy, flickering like fireflies in the dark. You eat roasted lentils under a star-filled sky. You tell stories by firelight and hear your grandparents' voices softened by time. You wake up one morning and realise it's been 3 days since anyone cried. That's how people survive. Not with heroic acts, but with tiny victories stacked like stones. Here's a strange but true fact. Even as civilization collapses, some people flourish, sort of. There are fringe communities that never bought into the palace system to begin with. They lived in the hills, in marginal lands the big kingdoms ignored. They didn't have grand temples or literacy or gold-plated furniture. But now, without anything to lose, they're at an advantage. They already know how to get by on little. They don't rely on trade routes or grain rations. You might find yourself among them, learning new ways to hunt, gathering strange herbs for medicine, using animal fat as waterproofing. They survive through familiarity with hardship, not through dominance. And now, weirdly, you need them more than they ever needed you. The debate among modern scholars is whether most people died in the collapse, or whether they just changed. Some argue for mass depopulation, widespread famine, warfare, disease. Others think many people simply left the cities and faded into rural anonymity, where archaeology can't easily track them. It's still argued over like an ancient grudge match, but down here in the weeds of survival, you don't need charts and pottery shards to understand what's happening. You just need to watch the steady stream of people leaving urban ruins behind, carrying everything they own in baskets and blankets, looking for fertile land, friendly faces, and anything that isn't on fire. You probably travel too eventually, either by choice or necessity. Maybe your well dries up, maybe the bandits get too bold, maybe someone dies and there's no one left to help you bury them. So you gather your things, whatever's left, and walk. You follow riverbanks, overgrown paths, and stars you don't fully trust. You trade stories around campfires with other wanderers. Some people you meet are kind, some are not. There are places where whole villages have vanished overnight, and others where new communities are building themselves from the ground up, complete with shared grain stores, communal watch systems, and rules scrawled on animal skins. Eventually you settle somewhere new, not because it's perfect, but because it's stable enough. There's water, there's land to plant, there are people willing to work together without stabbing each other over goats. It's not a city, it's not even a town really, but it's a beginning. You build a hut, you dig a pit for compost, you learn how to make thread from flax, and in the quiet moments, when you're not exhausted or hungry, you notice that something like hope is growing again. Tentative, fragile, but real. You don't miss the old world as much as you thought you would. Sure, you miss things, warm bread from the baker, songs echoing from temple walls, the clang of bronze in the forge, but those things feel distant now, like dreams. What you care about now is whether the roof leaks and whether the seeds you planted will sprout, whether the old man in the next hut will survive the winter, and if he doesn't, who will look after his daughter. You care about people, not systems, about survival, not status. So no, you're not special, you're something better, resilient, and that might just be enough. Hunger has a voice. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, it gnaws. It hums in the background of every waking moment, a dull pressure behind your eyes, in your belly, in the way your limbs feel heavier than they should. And in this post-collapse world, that voice is the new town crier. It tells you everything you need to know. The rains were late, the granary's almost empty, and winter's coming whether you're ready or not. There's no such thing as a reliable harvest anymore. The systems that once managed irrigation, tracked planting cycles, stored surplus grain, and redistributed it during lean times, they're gone. The scribes who tallied offerings to the gods and managed food logistics have long since fled, or starved, or vanished into the dusty folds of the countryside. Now it's just you, a few stone hoes, and the hope that the weather doesn't betray you again. You remember when fields stretched in orderly rows, managed by workers who reported to officials who reported to the palace. Now the fields are patchy, erratic. Some were abandoned during the chaos. Others were claimed by whoever showed up next. You plant what seeds you can save. Barley, lentils, maybe some emmer wheat if you're lucky. You dig with tools that would have embarrassed your grandfather. Wooden ploughs reinforced with bone, chipped flint blades, anything that gets the job done. You compost every scrap, every dung pile, every fish head. Nothing is wasted. Waste is for people who still live in cities with choices, and the famine doesn't announce itself all at once. It arrives slowly, like a bad smell. First, you notice that meals are getting smaller. Then you start skipping meals entirely, giving more to children or elders. Then come the substitutions. Acorns ground into bitter paste, roots boiled into sludge, bark steeped into something vaguely edible. Your body shrinks into itself. Faces grow gaunt. Conversations turn thin and clipped. You learn to ration not just food, but your words. The worst days are in the middle of the dry season, when everything seems stretched and brittle. Children cry less. They don't have the energy. The old ones stop talking altogether, as if they're trying to leave quietly. Some people wander off and don't come back. You try not to ask where they went. Maybe they found food, maybe they didn't. Fringe survival tactics become your normal. Eating insects? Absolutely. Fermenting spoiled grain into something vaguely nutritious? Sure. Animal bones are boiled until they crumble, every drop of fat and marrow wrung out like treasure. The dogs that used to sleep at your feet are now competitors for scraps, or, on the darkest days, they become meat themselves. You don't judge anyone, not anymore. But here's a strange thing. Some people still thrive. Not in the Golden Palace sense, but in the I haven't starved to death sense. Up in the highlands or out in the river valleys, there are communities that figured it out early. They store grain in clay-sealed pits underground. They rotate crops. They keep bees. They cooperate. It sounds simple, but in this new world, sharing is radical. A village where people pool resources is safer than one where everyone hoards their own dwindling supplies. You trade with them when you can, if they'll let you. Sometimes you even think about moving there. One particularly dry season, you meet a trader, or what passes for one now. His cart is pulled by a donkey so thin it's practically see-through, and he offers goods like dried figs, salted fish, and smoked locusts. You trade him a finely woven reed mat and a few carved bone needles. He tells you about a settlement 3 days' walk upriver that still has water, trees, and even, he swears, a woman who bakes bread with wild herbs. It sounds like a myth. But then again, so did famine, until it wasn't. There's an old song your grandmother used to sing about the gods of grain, the ones who made wheat grow, who blessed the threshing floor, who kept rats from the storage jars. You haven't heard that song in a long time. You wonder if the gods left, or if they're just waiting for people to remember the old ways. Maybe the collapse was their punishment. Maybe it was just bad luck. You're too tired to care about the difference. Scholars today argue endlessly over whether drought caused the famine, or if famine was just one symptom of the greater collapse. Some think climate change, possibly driven by volcanic activity or shifting ocean currents, triggered a chain reaction, crop failures, famine, migration, war. Others say political systems failed first, and food insecurity followed. But for you, standing barefoot in a cracked field under a sky that refuses to rain, the origin doesn't matter. Hunger is hunger. It doesn't care about timelines. You adapt. That's your only choice. You learn to harvest wild barley, to dig tubers others overlook, to ferment anything even slightly sweet. You collect morning dew in cloth bundles and squeeze it into jars. You trade in seeds and recipes more than coin. In fact, coin is useless now. No one wants metal. People want calories. Salt, honey, dried meat, legumes, anything that fills a belly and staves off the cold ache of emptiness. And despite it all, despite the hunger and the grief and the endless scraping for survival, you go on. Maybe that's the most human thing about this whole chapter in history. You shouldn't survive. Statistically, you don't. But somehow, you do. Not because of strength, not because of divine favour, but because you know how to stretch one loaf of bread, how to share one pot of stew, how to listen when someone tells you about a hidden spring or a patch of wild onions near the cliffs. So yes, the famine is real, and brutal, but so is your endurance. And tonight, like most nights, you sit near a fire with others, fewer than before but still breathing, and you pass around a small bowl of roasted seeds. It's not enough, not really. But you all pretend it is, and for a while, that's almost the same thing. Someone hums the start of a song no one quite remembers. You lean back, your ribs visible beneath your tunic, your stomach still empty, but your spirit somehow not. The first time you hear the word sea people, it's more of a whisper than a warning. A passing trader mutters it like a curse, spitting afterward to ward off bad luck. You don't even know what it means. Are they pirates? A lost tribe? A vengeful army summoned by angry gods? No one can say for sure, and the stories swirl like dust devils. They come from the sea. They burn everything. They ride boats with curved prows like bird beaks, and they don't leave survivors. It sounds like a ghost story. But then one day, smoke rises from the coast, and you stop thinking it's just a rumour. The raiders are real. You don't see them up close at first. What you see are the people they've left behind. Refugees, women and children staggering into your valley with hollow eyes and blistered feet. They speak broken versions of your language or none at all. They carry what little they could grab, baskets, idols, blankets, half-dead goats. You feed them what you can. You listen to their stories with a growing pit in your stomach. They describe villages erased overnight, whole coastlines pillaged, fishing boats set on fire just to choke the harbours with ash and fear. The sea people, whoever they are, don't just conquer, they erase. At night you watch the horizon nervously. Your village is inland, tucked between dry hills, not exactly the most strategic target. But that doesn't mean you're safe. No one is. That's what makes them so terrifying. There's no logic to their path. They aren't an army with a front line. They're a swarm. They hit Cyprus, Ugarit, parts of Canaan, even try to breach Egypt. And while Egypt barely holds them off, you know from the stories that even the mighty Pharaoh had to go full panic mode, scrambling to fortify the Nile Delta like it was the end of the world. Which for many it was. There's a theory some of them might have been displaced peoples, maybe from the Aegean or Western Anatolia. Desperate migrants driven by famine, earthquakes and collapse, just like you. But if that's true, they're survivalists with torches. They travel with entire families but fight like cornered wolves. Scholars still argue over their origin. Were they Mycenaeans who lost their homes? A confederation of raiders? Proto-Vikings of the Mediterranean? No one really knows. They didn't leave behind much but ashes and broken walls. But in this moment, you're not debating origin stories. You're digging a trench. You and your neighbours build defences as best you can. Spiked fences, watchtowers made of old carts stacked with mud bricks, even crude alarm systems with bells hung on strings. It's primitive, but it's all you've got. You designate someone to watch the horizon during the day. At night you rotate guards, and everyone sleeps with a club or spear within reach. You've never had to fight before? Not really. Now you train with sticks, listen for distant hoofbeats, and pray the wind doesn't carry the wrong kind of smoke. You're not alone in this panic. Across the Mediterranean, surviving communities do the same. Coastal cities build up their walls or abandon them entirely. Inland settlements swell with displaced families. The maps that once defined empires and borders are now meaningless. What matters now is proximity to water, arable land, and whether your neighbours will turn you in for a sack of barley. One morning a boy spots something on the horizon. Boats, or maybe just shadows of boats, gliding like ghosts along the river. The village freezes. You feel your stomach drop. Is this it? Are they finally here? You grip a spear you barely know how to use. Your hands are sweating and your heart sounds like war drums in your chest. But then, nothing. The shadows pass. Maybe they were just fishing canoes. Maybe they weren't. You never find out. And that's part of the cruelty. Fear becomes a constant background hum. Every rustle in the trees, every shout in the distance, it might be them. And the worst part, you start to understand them. You don't agree with the burning and killing, no. But you understand the desperation. The sea people don't destroy because they're evil. They destroy because they're starving. Because their homes were crushed by quakes or swallowed by drought. Because their crops failed and no one helped. Because when the world ended, they didn't just roll over. They picked up spears and sails and said, "Fine, we'll take what we need." You realise that, in a slightly different version of this story, you might have been them. One fringe theory even suggests that the sea people weren't a single group at all, but dozens of collapsing peoples clumped together by terrified survivors who couldn't tell one attacker from another. Maybe the name was just a catch-all, like a label slapped on the chaos so people had someone, anyone, to blame. You hear that the cities they hit the hardest, the ones along the Levantine coast, never really recover. Some become ghost towns, piles of blackened stone and pottery shards. Others get rebuilt generations later with new names and different gods. But by then, the sea people are long gone, swallowed by history, melted into local populations or lost at sea. They leave no written record, only destruction and fear, and stories like the ones now tattooed into your memory. Over time, the raids slow, not because they're defeated, but because there's less and less worth taking. A burned city doesn't get raided twice. The sea people vanish the way they arrived, suddenly and without explanation. And in the silence that follows, you realise something. Survival isn't just about defending yourself. It's about rebuilding something afterward. Anything. You start focusing on what's next. Strengthening the village walls, trading again, teaching the younger ones how to plant and harvest. You try to forget the days spent waiting for death by sail and spear, but it never fully leaves you. Every cloud on the horizon still tightens your gut. Every silence still feels like a warning. And when someone asks you, years later, what it was like when the sea people came, you won't have a clean answer. You'll just shake your head, stare into the fire and say, "We weren't ready." No one was. By now you've figured out that if you want something done, you're going to have to do it yourself. The old world had specialists for everything. Masons, potters, bakers, scribes, midwives, astronomers. Now, you're the mason, the potter, and the baker. And if your roof leaks, your bread burns, or your clay jars crack in the fire, well, congratulations. You've just learned something the hard way. In this post-collapse world, there's no one left to call. The age of the generalist has begun. You start building with what's around you. Mud, straw, wood, stone, if you can find it. There's no cutting timber from distant forests or hauling exotic marble. Every bit of material is hauled on your back or dragged on a sled of bundled sticks. You mix mud brick in shallow pits, stomping barefoot until your feet are stained the colour of earth. Then you mould it by hand, bake it in the sun, and stack it into walls that might last a season if you're lucky. Your home is simple. One room, low ceiling, a hole in the roof for smoke to escape. You sleep on woven mats, share space with goats or chickens, and hang dried herbs from the rafters. There's no privacy, no furniture beyond what you can build with a hatchet and patience, and yet it's yours. You built it. No landlord, no overseer, no king's tax collector, just your hands and the dirt beneath them. Food? Still a struggle, but you've gotten smarter. You learned how to dry fish using smoke and hot stones. You plant beans in between your barley to fix the soil. You even figured out how to make a crude sort of cheese using nothing but animal stomach lining and warm sun. Your ancestors would be proud, or horrified, it's hard to say. You trade some of what you grow or make for other essentials. A new flint blade, a bundle of salt, a coil of twine. It's all barter now and the currency is effort. You also keep a toolkit. Nothing fancy, a few flint scrapers, some bone awls, a wooden mallet, a hammerstone. These things matter more than gold ever did. Gold can't dig a trench or cut firewood, but a good scraper, that's survival. You sharpen your blades against river stones and keep them wrapped in leather when not in use. You learn which kinds of wood bend without breaking, which ones burn hot, and which ones split too easily. Every object you own tells a story about how hard you worked for it. Some of the older folks talk about the time before, the time when tools were made of bronze, when carts had wheels bound with iron nails, when lamps burned oil from foreign shores. You've seen some of those artifacts in the dirt, a snapped bronze dagger, a broken loom weight, a crumbled tablet with writing you can't read. These objects feel alien now, like they belong to a different species. You pick them up, turn them over in your hands, and wonder how people could live with so much complexity. But not all knowledge was lost. You remember things, you share stories. Someone in your village knows how to make soap from ash and fat. Another knows how to set a broken arm with sticks and cloth. Someone else has preserved an old chant that keeps rhythm for harvesting grain. These bits of information, tiny fragments, are how you rebuild. Not as it was, but as it can be now. One day, a stranger arrives in your village, pulling a cart with squeaky wooden wheels. He has a patched cloak and a sun-darkened face, and when he opens his mouth, he speaks your language with a strange twist. He carries tools, not new but sharp and well kept. He trades for food, offers to help reinforce your storage hut. You watch him work and realise he knows things you don't. He shows you how to lash branches into arches for a stronger roof. He repairs a broken pot using a method you've never seen before, stitching the shards together with copper wire. You've never seen anyone stitch clay before. It feels like watching someone perform a magic trick with dirt. You're reminded in that moment that knowledge is the real treasure now. Not the big, shiny kind passed down in scrolls or scribbled in temples, but the everyday kind. The wisdom of how to make things that don't fall apart. How to clean a wound without killing someone. How to tell the weather by the shape of the clouds. How to trap birds without a net. These things are survival, and they're slipping through the cracks unless someone passes them on. There's a debate among modern historians about just how much knowledge survived the collapse. Some say the loss was catastrophic, like humanity forgetting how to write its own name. Others argue that knowledge didn't vanish. It just went underground. It left the cities, the libraries, the temples, and found refuge in villages like yours, in minds like yours. Maybe people didn't forget how to do things. Maybe they just stopped doing them until it made sense again. Fringe theories even suggest that some collapse survivors chose simplicity, that they walked away from complexity because they realised it made them vulnerable. They didn't want to depend on foreign tin to make tools, or centralised governments to manage food. They wanted to know how to do everything themselves, not because it was romantic, but because it was safer. Harder, yes, but safer. So now you live in a world of tools that you make, clothes that you stitch, homes that you patch with mud when it rains. And you're still standing. Maybe your hands are blistered and your back aches every evening, but you've survived earthquakes, famine and raiders. You've stared into the hollow pit of what used to be civilization, and you've said, "Fine. Let's start again." You walk past your field one evening, the barley swaying in the wind like golden fur. You've placed small traps near the edge for rabbits. A few kids chase each other through the grass, and someone's playing a tune on a bone flute. Smoke rises from your cook fire. The tools are laid out beside it, cleaned, sharpened, ready for another day. And in that moment, something soft and quiet blooms in your chest. It's not pride. It's not hope, exactly. It's just this. You're doing it. With scraped hands and scavenged knowledge, with no map and no safety net, you're surviving. And maybe that's what rebuilding actually looks like. Not a dramatic comeback, not a sudden return to glory, just one handmade tool at a time. The gods, it turns out, are a lot quieter after the world ends. The towering temples you once walked past, columns reaching for the heavens, painted friezes, priests chanting in languages only they were allowed to know, are mostly rubble now. And even if a few still stand, the incense has long stopped burning. The offerings, picked clean. The scribes who tracked lunar omens and translated dreams into prophecies, gone, or dead, or chopping wood just like the rest of you. But here's the funny part. Belief doesn't collapse just because buildings do. Even now, people still pray. You still pray. It's not the same, of course. You're not kneeling before golden statues or washing your hands in a sacred basin before approaching the altar. Now you mutter prayers while planting seeds, while boiling water, while holding your breath beside a child burning with fever. The rituals are smaller, grittier, less about divine spectacle, more about survival insurance. You whisper the old names, Baal, Astarte, Ishtar, Yahweh, sometimes without knowing what they meant, only that someone long ago told you they mattered. Religion used to be a performance, public, majestic, a way for kings to show they had a direct line to the divine. Now, faith feels personal, desperate. You're not looking for miracles, you just want the rats to stay out of the grain jar and for the river not to dry up before planting season. You remember the last festival before everything fell apart? It was the festival of the moon, or maybe the harvest rite. Honestly, they all blurred together. There were garlands, bread offerings, flute players in white robes. Everyone was pretending things were fine. The high priest still gave blessings. The merchant still donated extra grain to the temple storehouses. But you knew. Everyone knew. The gods weren't answering like they used to. Now people worship in corners. A chicken bone tied with red thread hung above a door. A carved stone face buried at the foot of a tree. A song hummed under the breath while washing hands in morning dew. No one really agrees on the details anymore. Every household invents its own flavour of faith. Some cling to the old pantheon, patching together broken myths. Others turn to ancestral spirits, or invent new ones entirely. One man in your village swears his grandfather became a guardian spirit after dying during a lightning storm. Another claims that the wind speaks to her when she sleeps near olive trees. You're not sure what you believe. Some days you think the gods abandoned the world when the palaces fell. Other days you wonder if they're watching quietly, waiting to see who makes it through. Either way, it doesn't really change how you live. There's a fringe idea whispered among travelling herders. Maybe the gods were the system. Not real, not spiritual, just manifestations of order, power, control. The temple was law, the high priest was government, the rituals were bureaucracy and costume. When that structure cracked, so did the illusion. Now, without priests and scrolls to define them, the gods scatter like dust. Or maybe that's just something bitter people say when they've gone too long without answers. But even with the old religion fractured, symbols still hold power. You carry an amulet carved from shell, passed down from your mother. She said it protected her during childbirth. You don't know the name of the god it honours, but you still wear it, still touch it before sleeping. You've seen too much to abandon faith entirely. People need stories. People need meaning. And sometimes, when the wind shifts or the stars flicker just right, you feel like maybe, just maybe, something is still listening. Some villagers try to revive the old rituals stitched together from memory. A woman gathers herbs and burns them while chanting syllables she only half remembers. A man offers his first barley harvest to a stone idol dug from the creek bed. It's clumsy, heartfelt. No one has the authority to say if it's right or wrong anymore, which honestly might be a relief. One evening a stranger arrives. He's a wanderer, thin as bone, face darkened by dust and sun. But his voice is strong, and when he speaks, people gather. He doesn't look like a priest, but he talks like one. He speaks of one God, a single divine force above all others. Some folks scoff. One God? That's not enough gods. Others listen, wide-eyed, drawn to the simplicity. You hear whispers later that this new God doesn't demand temples or sacrifices, just belief and obedience. It sounds appealing in a way. Efficient, portable, like a religion that survives collapse by going minimalist. You don't convert, not exactly, but you add the name of this God to your mental list, just in case. You've seen what happens when people get too sure about divine protection. Historians today still debate how religion evolved after the collapse. Some say local cults took over, sprouting like weeds in the ruins of centralized systems. Others think this fragmentation laid the groundwork for the rise of monotheism, religions that offered structure and unity when the world felt like chaos. There's even a theory that faith became more emotional or individual, because people no longer trusted institutions to mediate between them and the divine. You see truth in all of it. The old gods are still there, somewhere, but they don't hold the monopoly anymore. Faith is wild now, decentralized, spread across 1,000 little practices stitched into daily life. And even if you're not sure who's watching, or if anyone is, you still murmur a prayer before planting, before boiling water, before walking alone at night. Not because you believe, necessarily, but because you hope. And in a world that's been through what yours has, hope might be the closest thing to sacred that's left. Later that night you sit by the fire, rubbing calloused fingers over your shell amulet. The stars are bright, crisp, distant. Someone's humming an old temple tune, low and slow. You close your eyes, and just for a moment you let yourself imagine that something hears you. Something ancient, patient, waiting. Maybe that's enough. You've heard stories about Egypt since you were old enough to sit still near a fire. Back when your own people still had temples and cities, Egypt was already ancient. Land of pyramids, lotus-crowned pharaohs, and a river that never stopped giving. They said the Nile was eternal. They said Egypt would never fall. And yet now, even mighty Egypt is flinching. You hear it first from a merchant, leathery-skinned and missing a few teeth, who trades copper pins and stories for a warm place to sleep. He says the grain ships from Egypt have stopped coming. That's the first sign. Egypt always had grain. Always. The rest of the world could be starving, but Egypt would still have barley, fish and dates. That's just how it was. But something's changed. He says they've started hoarding their own supplies, fortifying their cities. Their king, what's his name now, Ramses something, is holding on to power by tightening his grip and sharpening his sword. Not long after that you meet a family from the Delta. 3 kids and 2 tired-looking parents who manage to escape with nothing but a sack of lentils and a few scraps of linen. Their skin is dusted with salt and sunburn, their feet wrapped in rags. They speak with the soft cadence of the Nile, and they tell you, with haunted eyes, that Egypt did not fall, but it almost did. The sea people reached the Egyptian coast not long ago. They came with sails wide and blades ready, expecting to plunder as they had elsewhere. But Egypt wasn't just a city with a wall. It was a civilization wrapped around a river, defended by armies that had trained for generations. Ramses III, the current pharaoh, managed to turn them back in a battle that supposedly shook the sand from the pyramids. His inscriptions boast of victory. The foreign lands made a conspiracy in their islands. Their hearts and their souls are finished. And the temples still echo with those words. But that's the official story. And in your world, you've learned not to trust the official story. The truth you piece together from travellers and exiles is more complicated. Egypt may have won the battle, but it didn't win the war. The invaders didn't raze the cities, but they shattered the economy. Entire stretches of farmland were abandoned after labourers fled or died. The irrigation systems, once so reliable, went untended. Some villages went months without supplies from the capital. The temples, bloated and ceremonial, couldn't offer much more than chants. Famine crept in, just like everywhere else. Worse, the bureaucracy that held Egypt together, the scribes, the tax collectors, the stewards of grain and labour, began to crumble. Documents stopped flowing. Messages were delayed. Some scribes started forging reports to protect themselves. Others vanished, taking their skills and records with them. The state still existed, technically, but it was rotting from within, like a granary infested with weevils. And here's the part that stuns you most. Egypt, land of divine kings and eternal laws, had to cut corners. Temples stopped receiving regular offerings. Tombs for the elite were downsized or left unfinished. Even the pharaoh's palace reduced its court rituals, no longer feeding hundreds of retainers each day. It's said that one nobleman buried his wife with borrowed jewellery, cheap substitutes carved from painted wood instead of real gold. Egypt, it seems, was surviving, but barely. There's a fringe belief whispered among some outcasts that Egypt's near collapse was divine punishment, that the gods were tired of the pride of men and used the sea people to humble even the most ancient kingdom. Others argue the sea people were just the spark, that Egypt's real sickness was overreach. Too many wars, too much centralization, too little flexibility. A state so obsessed with order that it couldn't adapt when the world turned upside down. You meet someone who once served at a small temple in Thebes. He speaks in hushed tones about how, after the attacks, they buried sacred scrolls in sealed jars because they feared looters or worse, state collapse. He says some priests tried to preserve rituals by teaching children in secret, passing chants and incantations like contraband. He carries one such chant on a scrap of cloth, sewn into the hem of his tunic. He says it's a protection hymn meant to keep homes safe during storm and war. You believe him, not because you know it works, but because you need to believe something still does. And yet, even in decline, Egypt holds a strange allure. It's one of the few places where you can still see functioning cities, even if they're shadows of what they once were. Boats still move along the Nile, markets still hum, softly, with life. Soldiers still patrol the borders. You consider travelling there just to see it. But you hesitate. You've heard that outsiders aren't welcome anymore. That fear has hardened their borders. That hospitality is reserved only for those who prove useful. Still, you wonder what it would be like to see the Nile, this river that outlived kings, floods, wars, even the sea people. Maybe Egypt didn't fall. Maybe it just learned to flinch, to duck when the world swung its blade. And maybe that's the difference between collapse and survival. Scholars today still marvel that Egypt endured while its neighbours crumbled. Some chalk it up to geography. The Nile's predictable flooding offered a buffer. Others say it was sheer political inertia, the weight of millennia pressing forward. A few even suggest that Egypt's religion, so deeply embedded into daily life, provided stability in a way that others couldn't replicate. No one agrees on the exact reason. And maybe that's because survival isn't something you can pin to a single cause. It's messy, uneven, unpredictable, like everything else now. That night, you stare at the stars and think of Egypt, far to the south, glowing dimly like a dying coal in a vast, dark hearth. You picture its temples half-lit, its priests chanting hollow hymns, its soldiers watching the riverbanks with tired eyes. Still there, still holding on, just like you. You don't realise it right away, but you're living in a post-city world, not post-human, not post-culture, just post-city. The big stone-built centres of bureaucracy, trade and royal drama are gone or dying. No more grid-planned roads, no more palace archives, no more scribes recording the arrival of tribute shipments like they're the centre of the universe. And in their place, mud huts, wattle fences, goats chewing on the remains of what used to be courtyards. The age of empire has given way to the age of the village. You used to live in a city, or near enough to one that it affected your life. Back then, cities meant grain storage, law codes, priests and marketplaces. It meant you didn't have to know how to do everything yourself because someone else did it for you. A cobbler, a potter, a toolmaker. But the moment the city burned or emptied out, those specialists scattered like birds. Without trade, cities don't work. Without protection, they're just targets. You watched as the last traders packed up their carts, the priests shut their temple doors, and even the rats got bored and moved on. Now you live in a cluster of homes that doesn't have a name. Or if it does, it changes depending on who you ask. Some call it the upper fields, others just call it the place by the bend in the river. It's a collection of huts, lean-tos and semi-permanent shelters, ringed with a few makeshift fences and a couple of watchfires. There's no market square, no temple, no written laws. What you have instead are conversations, constant ones. Because when everything depends on cooperation, trust and who's good at smoking fish, talking is survival. The rules of your village aren't written anywhere, but everyone knows them. Share water, don't steal food, Don't lead raiders here. If you're caught lying about your stores in the middle of winter, you're gone. Not punished. Gone. Sent away to walk into the forest and take your chances with the jackals. It sounds brutal, but it works. Brutality and order have started to look a lot like the same thing these days. And you trade. Oh, do you trade? Not with coins or weights or stamped seals. That stuff's done. You trade smoked meat for woven baskets, dried herbs for goat cheese, a hand-stitched tunic for a fishhook made from carved bone. It's bartering, sure, but it's also reputation. You trade fairly because if you don't, you might not get a second chance. People talk. One bad deal and suddenly no one wants your dried figs anymore, and trust me, figs rot fast when no one's buying. A travelling woman once passed through carrying a basket of clay tablets from some ruined city. She said they were receipts, records of trade, inventories of temple offerings. She was planning to repurpose them into roofing tiles. You asked if you could keep one. You don't know what it says, but you like the idea that it once meant something. Now it holds your door open on windy days. Civilization becomes a paperweight in the blink of a generation. But even here, in your mud and thatch world, there's change. New structures rise, storage pits become communal, walls get built higher, a grain cache is started, watched over by a council of 3 older women who remember how things used to work. You laugh when someone calls them queens. They laugh too, but deep down, you know it's not a joke. In a world without kings, the most organised person with the least tolerance for nonsense becomes the closest thing to royalty. There's something comforting about it, honestly. The village isn't grand. It's not impressive. But it works. People eat. Children play. You've built a water catchment system out of clay jars and old roof tiles. Someone even taught themselves how to make soap from ash and goat fat. Another makes a decent musical instrument from hollowed wood and string. At night, the sound of it floats over the thatched rooftops, soft and cracked like memory itself. You still find artifacts sometimes, bits of bronze, chunks of worked stone, a child's toy carved from ivory. Sometimes you try to imagine the city they came from, what it smelled like, what it sounded like, who the child was whose fingers last held this tiny horse-shaped figure. But the city is gone, not just burned, but erased, scavenged brick by brick. Its bones fed into new walls, new hearths, new homes. You're not rebuilding that world. You're building something different. There's a theory among archaeologists today that these villages weren't just temporary shelters after the collapse. They were deliberate choices. People chose smaller, tighter communities where power was shared and risks were managed together. They weren't just waiting for cities to come back. They were moving on. Some scholars call it de-urbanization, but you think that word misses the point. It's not that people forgot how to build cities, it's that they remembered what mattered more. You know someone who tried to go back. He left your village, heading toward a ruined city he'd heard rumours about, said it had walls still standing and half a palace left. He came back 6 weeks later, covered in dirt and shame. The city was there, sure, but it was dead. The kind of dead that smells. Wild dogs and scavengers lived there now. No ghosts, no treasure, just echoes. He doesn't talk about it anymore. He built a hut near the northern fence and hasn't left since. Sometimes at night people talk about the old world like it was a dream. They speak of ships so large they carried whole orchards, of libraries with walls of text, of towers built to honour stars. And then someone throws another stick on the fire and says, "But we've got goats!" And everyone laughs, because it's true. And in this new age, a good goat is worth more than any crumbling tower. You fall asleep that night to the sound of frogs near the stream, someone snoring 3 huts away, and the wind slipping through reed fences. It's not the sound of a city, but it's the sound of life, and that, you think, might be better. You wouldn't think survival has a sound, but it does. In the Anatolian highlands, it's the scrape of stone hoes against dry earth. It's the soft murmur of women shelling lentils under olive trees, the bark of a dog chasing a goat that refuses to be milked, and the low rumble of thunder that might mean rain, or might just pass you by like so many promises. Up here, far from the crumbling palaces and raided coastlines, there's a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of destruction, but of endurance. Your people didn't build monuments. They weren't the ones carving records onto stone steles or writing poetry on gold-leaf scrolls. If the cities were the loud, glittering heart of the Bronze Age, the highlands were its lungs, steady, rhythmic, mostly ignored. And yet, when everything else collapsed, guess who was still breathing? You wake up to the smell of damp earth and goat dung as always. The village here doesn't have roads so much as paths worn by bare feet and the dragging of sleds. The houses are squat and circular, built low to the ground to keep out the wind and hold in the heat. There's a central fire pit, a few granaries made of packed clay, and terraced fields climbing the slopes like patient stairways. No stone walls, no towers, no temples, just the essentials. You were lucky to find this place. After your home near the coast fell, burned, abandoned, looted, take your pick, you wandered for weeks, through forests, over rivers, past towns that no longer existed. You slept under trees, bartered for scraps, once killed a snake with a stick and ate it 3 days later, and then you found the farmers, or maybe they found you. They weren't exactly welcoming, but they weren't hostile either. They watched you like a wild animal for days before deciding you were more useful than dangerous. That's the standard now. Life here is built around routine, and that's exactly what makes it survivable. The people rise with the sun and work until dusk. They grow barley, emmer wheat, pulses, modest crops, but reliable. The soil isn't rich, but it holds enough memory of rain to yield food if treated right. There's a spring nearby, cold and stubborn. You learn to channel the water in narrow ditches that snake between the terraces. They showed you how to use sheep's wool mixed with clay to line your grain baskets and keep the damp out. There's no hierarchy here, not really. Just a loose consensus led by the oldest among them. An old man with crooked fingers who knows how to graft fig trees. A woman with a deep scar across her shoulder who tells stories in a sing-song voice while spinning flax. They remember the cities. They remember the collapse. They don't talk about it unless pressed. And when they do, their eyes shift to the sky like they're checking for omens. One of the most surprising things about life here is how little changes. Outside, people are fighting over scraps, forming war bands, trying to carve little fiefdoms out of someone else's ruins. But here, it's another planting, another harvest, another winter survived. They keep goats and sheep, not for meat, but for milk, wool, and warmth. Nothing is wasted. Every piece of bone becomes a tool. Every broken pot gets patched with pitch or repurposed as a bowl for chickens. Some days you wonder if this is what it means to live in a dark age. Not chaos and fire, but repetition, simplicity, a slower rhythm. But then again, maybe that's not such a bad thing. When everything else was burning, these people were still here, still farming, still passing down songs and herbal remedies and ways to keep grain from sprouting in storage. Civilization doesn't just fall, it softens, changes shape, adapts to the cracks. And here in the Highlands it keeps a low profile. Modern archaeologists argue about places like this. They dig into the Highlands and find layers of simple domestic life, unbroken by war or collapse. They debate whether these people were refugees from cities or just rural communities that had always existed on the margins. Some say these settlements were the true continuity of human culture during the collapse, preserving basic survival knowledge while the elite structures crumbled. Others argue they were isolated holdouts, lucky pockets of stability surrounded by chaos. The truth? Probably both. There's a strange moment one morning, months after you've settled in, when you look around and realise you no longer feel like an outsider. Your feet know the paths, your hands have calluses in all the right places. You know the seasons of the land, you know who to trust with your tools and who will try to take more than they give. You've even started to dream in the dialect they speak here, its rough consonants and soft vowels weaving into your thoughts like roots in soil. A boy is born in the village. He's the first baby in nearly 2 years. His mother, a wide-hipped woman with quiet strength, names him after a bird known for surviving harsh winters. You help build his cradle from scraps of pine and weave a blanket from goat wool and old fabric. When he opens his eyes, you wonder if he'll ever know what the world used to be, or if the world he grows up in will seem like the way things were always meant to be. You keep a few treasures in a small basket near your sleeping mat. A bent piece of bronze, once a knife maybe. A smooth stone you found near a stream that fits perfectly in your palm. A small shard of painted ceramic from a city you no longer name. You're not holding on to the past exactly, more like letting it breathe beside you. It's a reminder of where you came from, of what was lost, of what's still worth saving. And maybe that's the quiet brilliance of these forgotten farmers. They didn't wait for the cities to rise again. They didn't petition the gods to bring back the old order. They didn't need a palace or a market square to keep going. They just kept going. While kings fell and scribes fled, they planted beans and sang to their children and patched their roofs with straw. It's not flashy, it's not glorious, but it's real. And in a world where everything once collapsed, that's enough. You reach the edge of a hill and look down into a valley that feels oddly still. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. The wind moves through tall grass, but nothing else stirs. At the centre of the valley are the remains of a city, or what used to be one. You don't know what name it carried when it was alive. Maybe it was Mycenae, or Tiryns, or Pylos, or some smaller cousin swallowed by time. But the bones are unmistakable. Great stone blocks, once stacked with purpose, now tumbled and overgrown. The gate still stands, just barely. You can't look at it without picturing what it must have guarded. You descend slowly, cautiously. The stories of ghost cities aren't just metaphors. Sometimes bandits squat in them, sometimes disease lingers, and sometimes a silence that deep feels like it could swallow you whole. But you press on, boots crunching gravel until you're standing in what was once a courtyard. There's a well, choked with weeds, a slab of stone etched with symbols. Linear B, you think, though you don't read it. That script belonged to the scribes, the palatial elite, the ones who disappeared when the walls fell. You're standing in a Mycenaean ghost town. Once, this place was the height of Bronze Age power. Thick walls, elite warriors, storehouses packed with tribute, chariots, perfumed nobles in embroidered linen. Now, just rubble and wind. You find a shard of pottery painted with spirals. The glaze is still faintly red. You wonder if the person who painted it ever imagined their art would be found like this, centuries later, by someone scrounging for edible weeds. You pocket it, not because it's valuable, just because it's proof that someone lived. There are signs of a hasty exit, scattered bones, a cooking pot left in the ashes, tools still on a workbench. The city wasn't peacefully abandoned. It was left mid-breath, like someone shouting, "Fire!" but never finishing the word. What happened here? War? Famine? A disease that hit too fast? Or was it that slow, steady decay, the kind you don't notice until the roof finally caves in? Scholars still argue about what finished off the Mycenaeans. Earthquakes? Invasions? Internal rebellion? Pick your theory. The Linear B records vanish around the same time the palaces fall. That's no coincidence. Writing wasn't for poetry, it was for tracking grain, managing slaves, recording how many jars of oil were sent to the king's cousin. When the palaces died, the purpose for writing died with them. And yet the people didn't all vanish. The cities crumbled, yes, but some survivors scattered into the hills, the coastlines, the islands. They stopped writing, stopped building monumental architecture, stopped organising their lives around royal bureaucracy. It's called the Greek Dark Age for a reason. Archaeologically it goes dim. But dim isn't dead. In fact, the villagers you met last month might be descendants of the ones who fled here. They still use words that sound like echoes of older tongues. They still bury their dead with beads and bronze when they can find it. They still tell stories of heroes who fought with lions and fire, though no one really believes them anymore. You sit down on a crumbled wall and try to imagine this place at its peak. Priests moving through courtyards, scribes hunched over tablets, warriors oiling bronze blades. It all feels so distant now. Too extravagant, too breakable. This city didn't fall because someone pushed it. It fell because it couldn't bend. You spend the night camped inside one of the ruined homes. The roof is long gone, but the stones still hold some warmth from the day's sun. You light a small fire, cook a thin soup from lentils and dried herbs, and listen to the wind moan through doorways built for kings. Sleep doesn't come easy. You keep thinking about how all these stones were cut, hauled, placed, by hands not so different from yours. And now, they're a shelter for someone who would have never been allowed through the front gate when this place was alive. One strange detail stands out. You find no signs of a battle. No charred remains, no arrowheads, no crumbled siege works. It's like the city just gave up. Maybe that's what really happened. Not a fiery conquest, but a slow suffocation. One trade route lost, one harvest failed. One too many enemies gathering strength while the palace argued about protocol. And when the end came, it wasn't with a bang. It was with a packed cart and a last look over the shoulder. Back in your own village, when people speak of the past, they always use big words. Collapse, fall, ruin. But here, walking through the bones of Mycenae, or something like it, you start to see the truth. Civilizations don't always crash. Sometimes they just stop working. And the people inside, the ones who aren't kings or generals or scribes, they do what they've always done. They leave, they adapt, they survive. There's a fringe idea floating around among modern historians that the collapse wasn't entirely negative, that it forced a levelling of society. The palaces vanished, but so did the burden of elite control. No more tribute. No more forced labour for vanity projects. No more scribes tracking how many sheep you owned and whether you'd sacrificed enough to the gods this season. In the long view, maybe the collapse opened the door for a different kind of life. You can't decide if that's hopeful or just a tidy excuse. You don't romanticize collapse. You know what it costs. But still, there's something in this city's silence that feels less like death and more like sleep. Maybe the land is waiting. Maybe the stones are too. In the morning, you wake early and place the pottery shard back where you found it. Let it rest. Let the past breathe. Then you leave the ghost town behind, following a narrow path downhill toward the sound of water and birdsong. The cities are gone, but the people, your people, are still walking, and that at least is something. It happens quietly, almost like a joke. You go to repair a sickle blade that's cracked at the edge, and the blacksmith, if you can even call him that, more of a tinker with a fire pit, shakes his head and says, "No more bronze." You blink. "What do you mean, no more bronze?" He shrugs. "No tin. Haven't had any in months. Maybe longer." You stare at the half-ruined blade in your hand, suddenly realizing that you've been living off leftovers from a world that doesn't exist anymore. Bronze is dead. Not metaphorically, actually practically dead. And the problem with that is simple. Bronze is what the whole old world ran on. You used it for tools, for weapons, for ceremonial masks and door hinges and chariot wheels and about 100 other things you never even thought about until they weren't available. And now you're holding a hunk of metal that might as well be a rock, because without tin to mix with copper, there's no more bronze. Just copper, soft and clingy, like the annoying cousin at a funeral who won't stop touching you. This is what happens when global trade collapses. Tin wasn't local. It had to be hauled across deserts, mountains, and half the known world to reach the forges. That worked fine when there were merchant fleets, taxes, tribute, and cities with shiny docks. But now there are wolves in the forests and no one patrolling the roads. The routes are broken, the alliances shattered, and tin has become a rumour. You try using stone tools again. It feels like a regression, like walking backward into a cave. But necessity doesn't care about dignity. You learn to sharpen obsidian blades and reinforce them with wooden handles bound in rawhide. You use bone needles, grind grain with flat stones, and cut firewood with tools that would have made your great-grandfather laugh or cry. But somewhere in the distance something new is stirring, or rather something old. Iron. It starts as a whisper among the tinkerers and the wanderers. Iron is terrible, they say, brittle, inconsistent, more trouble than it's worth, but it exists. You can dig it out of the ground yourself. No tin caravans required. You don't need to beg a merchant to smuggle it past 3 burned-out cities and 2 bandit kings. It's here, in the hills, if you're stubborn enough to dig for it and foolish enough to try forging it. You watch a man do just that. He's half mad, probably. He's spent weeks hauling rocks, heating them with charcoal in a pit furnace, and hammering the results like he's trying to beat the old world back into shape. What comes out is ugly, lumpy, uneven, but it cuts. Badly at first. Better with practice. And the more they tinker, the more these amateur blacksmiths figure out how to coax the iron into usefulness. Iron doesn't melt like copper. It has to be persuaded, worked hot, not liquid. And that means a whole new kind of forging, a whole new set of skills. There are no instruction tablets for this, no school, just trial, error, and maybe a few explosions. The early blades are worse than bronze, but slowly, as if the metal itself is evolving alongside you, iron begins to catch up. You get your first iron blade from a travelling metal worker who looks like he's been struck by lightning one too many times. It's heavy, pitted, slightly warped, but it works. It stays sharp longer than your flint tools. It hacks through roots without breaking. You don't know it yet, but this is the beginning of something massive. Not just for you, but for the entire world. You've heard historians talk about this transition like it was planned, like people calmly switched from bronze to iron as a matter of convenience. But standing here, with this ugly, uneven blade in your calloused hand, you know better. It wasn't a leap forward, it was a desperate scramble out of a burning house, grabbing whatever material didn't melt in the flames. Iron wasn't progress, it was survival. Some of the old guard, the few scribes or priests you meet along the way, act like the rise of iron is a kind of blasphemy. It's crude, they say, unrefined. And maybe they're right. Bronze was polished and noble. Iron is dirty, loud, violent. You don't ritually anoint an iron sword before battle. You pound it into shape and hope it doesn't snap in your hand. And yet, here it is, growing more common, sharpening itself into history. You notice the change in other ways too. Bandits now carry iron blades, not scavenged bronze. Farmers have iron-tipped ploughs, which bite deeper into soil and leave straighter furrows. You even hear rumours of an iron axe that can fell a tree in half the time it takes with flint. At first, you think it's an exaggeration. Then you see one for yourself, wielded by a herder with arms like tree trunks. He splits logs like they owe him money. There's a debate among scholars now about whether iron was a cause of the collapse or a response to it. Some fringe theorists suggest iron was too good, that it disrupted the elite's control over bronze trade, undermined palace economies, and led to social instability. Others argue that iron was simply the only available option once the system imploded. Like using a rusted bucket after your golden goblet falls down a well. You're firmly in the second camp. You don't care about theories. You care that your new sickle works, that you can cut grain faster, that you don't have to bargain with a man 3 valleys over for a few broken shards of bronze. You start to see signs of ironworking popping up in other villages, smoke plumes from simple furnaces, the rhythmic pounding of hammers against anvils made from salvaged stone. Children gather around to watch the sparks fly, eyes wide. There's something primal about it. The forging of metal feels like the forging of hope. Hot, chaotic, dangerous, but real. It won't be refined for a long time. Iron still cracks, still rusts, still misbehaves. But with each blade, each plough, each horseshoe or fishhook hammered into existence, your world shifts a little more towards something new. Not a return to the glory of bronze, not a resurrection of empire, just a different path forward, rougher, louder, maybe stronger. You look down at your hand, calloused and burned from working the forge with your neighbours. In your palm is a small iron knife, just finished. Crooked, sharp, a little too heavy. It's not perfect, but it's yours. And in this world that forgot how to be perfect, that's more than enough. You hear the song before you see the village. It's not formal music, no lyres or harps or elaborate choral arrangements like the old cities once boasted, but it's music all the same. A single voice, a little roar, carrying through the dusk as you walk a winding trail down a rocky slope. It's a kind of chant, repeating verses with slight changes, something about a man who outwits a lion by tricking it with fermented dates. You can't help but smile. It's ridiculous, and somehow deeply comforting. For the first time in a long while, someone is telling a story that isn't about loss. When you reach the village, stone huts and low walls tucked beside a cold river, you realise no one's writing anything down. There are no tablets, no scrolls, not even scrap hide with marks scratched into it. And yet, they all remember. The children recite stories like they're chewing on them. The elders sing histories around the fire. You meet a boy, maybe 10, who can repeat 20 generations of his mother's family, going all the way back to someone named Stone Knee, a nickname apparently for a man who survived a bear attack. No documentation, no monument, just memory. You're in what people will one day call the Greek Dark Age, though to you it doesn't feel especially dark. Sure, there are no palaces, no armies marching in clean formations, no imports from Cyprus or Egypt, but there's warmth, community, and a strange new clarity. The stories are still here. They've just gone from carved into clay to carved into minds. Back in the Bronze Age, everything was written down. Linear B tablets tracked livestock rations, trade shipments, and the names of deities. Bureaucracy was sacred. But it was also fragile. Fires and raiders made quick work of those clay archives, and the language itself, Linear B, basically vanished when the palaces did. The scribes were trained in specialised schools, their knowledge confined to elite classes. When the elite collapsed, so did the script. And so, your world adapted. You don't write anymore. You remember. There's a girl in the village who knows a version of the tale of a man named Odysseus, or something close to it. The name changes slightly every time she says it. In her story, he's not a war hero yet, just a clever farmer who once tricked a sea monster by dressing like a woman and hiding in a sack of olives. You laugh, because you've heard other versions where he's a prince, a thief, a god. No one seems to mind the differences. The story lives in its retelling. That's what oral tradition does. It mutates, like a living thing. You've come to realise that in this time of slow rebuilding, the people who speak and listen are more powerful than those who once wrote, because writing can burn. But a well-told story, it migrates, and there's a rhythm to it. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're memory scaffolding. Lessons on how to survive a famine hidden in metaphors about goats and greedy spirits. Maps disguised as songs. Warnings wrapped in riddles. They tell of when to plant certain seeds, how to treat bee stings, which mushrooms are safe and which will make you see ghosts. There's one elder, missing most of his teeth, who tells a particular story every winter. It's about a city made entirely of gold, so beautiful that people forgot how to plant their fields. They grew lazy, waiting for gold to feed them. Then a fire came, and the gold melted, and the fields were dust. Everyone died. The moral? Don't forget the land. He tells it the same way every year. The same pause before the fire, the same rasping cough before the last line. You don't need writing to keep a warning alive. You just need repetition, and someone to care enough to keep saying it. There's an ongoing debate, at least in the future, about how much culture really survived the Greek Dark Age. The loss of writing meant that political histories, epic records, even laws were lost. But at the same time, something new was being born. The seeds of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the foundations of Greek myth, the origin stories of gods and mortals, all of it began here, in small places like this, around firelight, shared by people whose names would never be carved into stone. Some fringe scholars even believe that the collapse of written culture was a kind of liberation. Without the bureaucratic weight of the palaces, ideas could travel lighter and freer. You didn't need royal approval to compose a tale. You didn't need a priest to declare something sacred. If you could speak and others would listen, you had power. And yet the downside is real. Memory is slippery. Stories morph. Facts bleed into fiction. A harvest ritual becomes a heroic myth. A warning about drought transforms into a tale about a jealous god. Is it history? Is it metaphor? At some point, no one can tell anymore, and maybe they don't need to. One night, a storm rolls in from the sea. Everyone crowds into the central longhouse. 30 people packed shoulder to shoulder, the fire flickering as rain drums the roof. And someone begins a story, not with a once upon a time, but with a steady chant, a beat you can feel in your ribs. It's about a woman who stole fire from the gods and hid it in her mouth. Every time she spoke, her words burned, and her enemies were silenced. You listen, transfixed. When it's over, someone else picks up the rhythm and begins a new tale. This is your theatre now, your university, your archive. It's messy, loud, imperfect, and alive. You think about writing sometimes, about what it must have felt like to have permanent words, instructions, inventories, names you could pass down exactly, unchanging. And yet, when you try to picture a tablet in your hand, it feels cold, heavy, unwieldy. You carry your stories in your breath now, in your voice, in your memory. They live only if you share them. In the morning you hear a child repeating lines from last night's tale while chasing a chicken through the grass. She stumbles, giggling, then recites the ending correctly, her voice rising like a little priestess. You smile. That story will live another generation, shaped by her tongue, her life, her rhythm. The world lost its scribes, but it found its storytellers, and you, somehow, are one of them. You're squatting near a fire, watching a man hammer red-hot metal like he's trying to fight it into obedience. Sparks leap into the air and vanish into the dusk. He wipes sweat from his brow with a ragged sleeve and says something you don't catch. Maybe a curse, maybe a prayer. Whatever it was, the blade he's working on just cracked in half. Again. You flinch. He doesn't. He just tosses it into a growing pile of failures and starts over with another glowing lump of iron. This is your introduction to early ironworking. Part miracle, part madness, mostly frustration. You're in the presence of what might be called a blacksmith, though he wouldn't call himself that yet. Titles are still catching up with reality. He's just a guy who burns things until they bend. And in a world where bronze has become a relic of another age, this man with his cracked fingers and singed eyebrows is more valuable than any priest ever was. Iron has its own personality, meaner than bronze, more demanding. Bronze was smooth, obedient, easy to melt and pour. Iron has to be beaten into usefulness. It doesn't flow, it resists. It needs heat, time, and a stubborn streak that borders on insanity. The smith here has all three. He learned the hard way, as most people do now. Trial, error, and a lot of burns. The first tools are crude. You've seen bronze knives that could slice through hide like butter. These early iron ones? Not so much. They chip, they warp, they rust if you look at them sideways. But when they work, even just a little, they last. And the materials? They're everywhere. Iron ore litters the hills like treasure no one noticed until the old economy collapsed. You don't need to sail to Cyprus or beg a caravan for tin anymore. You just dig, burn, and hope. There's a growing energy around these smithing fires. You feel it. The way people gather to watch a blade being hammered into shape, like they're witnessing magic, or resurrection. Because that's what this is. The slow rebirth of craftsmanship, technology, and power. Not the kind of power that gets crowned and worshipped. The kind that splits logs, tills soil, and defends your goat from something with more teeth than sense. The first time you hold a finished iron knife, it feels wrong, heavier than you expect, uneven, a bit ugly. But you test it on a stalk of wild grain, and it cuts clean through. Your mouth goes dry. You don't say anything. You just nod and hand it back, and the smith grunts in satisfaction, already reaching for the next piece of glowing ore. You trade for 1-2 days later, 3 loaves of barley bread, a spool of cord, and a promise to help gather wood for the next batch of charcoal. It's steep but fair. Tools like this are becoming currency in their own right. A good iron blade can be traded for food, shelter, even protection. You've seen entire disputes settled by who owns the better hoe, and slowly across the land the sound of bronze fades. The old scraps are gone, melted and reused until there's nothing left but greenish stains in the dirt. The smiths who once worked with copper are learning the new craft, or fading away like the temples they once supplied. The shift is quiet, almost invisible, but irreversible. The Iron Age doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It sneaks in through the smoke, one ugly knife at a time. Historians still argue whether iron was a downgrade or a breakthrough. Technically, early iron tools were inferior to high-quality bronze. But quality doesn't mean much when your materials are trapped behind burned-out trade routes and marauding warbands. Iron was here. Iron was democratic. Anyone with enough fire and fury could shape it. There's even a strange side effect to iron's rise. Some call it the equalizer. In the Bronze Age, weapons and tools were expensive, elite-controlled, tied to palace economies and ritual. But now, any village idiot with a charcoal pit and a stubborn streak could arm himself, or feed his family, or build a wall. You feel it happening. Power isn't hoarded anymore. It's sweating out of smithing pits in 100 little backwoods settlements spreading like wildfire. Fringe thinkers of your time, and yes, there are always a few people bold enough to think fringe, even after a civilizational collapse, are starting to suspect that iron isn't just a new material. It's a new order, one that's less centralized, less ceremonial, more practical. You met a woman who said it plainly while carving a hilt. Bronze belonged to the kings. Iron belongs to the rest of us. Still, it's not easy. Iron is unforgiving. You've watched a man nearly lose a finger trying to split a failed blade. Another burned his eyebrows off during a misfire. One smith collapsed from the fumes of a poorly vented forge. There's danger here, but also something electric, something alive. The smell becomes familiar. Burning charcoal, hot iron, singed wool. You associate it now with progress, with resilience. It seeps into your clothes, clings to your hair. Some nights you dream of hammers striking anvils, ringing out into the cold air like the heartbeat of a new age. There's still no empire, no cities rising from the ashes, no gleaming palaces of iron. But there is a different kind of future taking shape. One that doesn't require divine kings or elaborate rituals, just sweat, grit, and a fire hot enough to bend the bones of the earth. You look at the blade you helped shape, still rough, still warming by the edge of the fire. You think of the old world and its smooth bronze, its perfect curves, its fragility. Then you think of this blade, ugly, scarred, real. Just like you don't expect much when you first spot the purple sails on the horizon. Just another boat passing by. Maybe some desperate traders clinging to old maps and fading hope. But as the ship glides into the bay, all carved prow and patched hull, you notice something different. The crew moves quickly, efficiently, barefoot on hot planks and rigging lines like dancers. They unload crates wrapped in woven reed mats, and when the lids come off, the entire harbour fills with the sharp, heady scent of something rich and strange. Someone near you whispers, "Phoenicians," like they're part myth, part miracle. And suddenly you realise not everyone is stuck in survival mode. These people, traders, artisans, wanderers from the Levantine coast, aren't limping away from collapse. They're riding it, navigating the broken world like it's just another storm to steer through. The Phoenicians aren't here to rebuild the old kingdoms. They're here to make new ones, floating ones, moving ones, stitched together with sailcloth and silver-tongued deals. They trade everything: dyes, wood, glass, metal scraps, fishhooks, knives and stories. But the thing they're most famous for, the thing that makes people lean closer and whisper like it's forbidden, is the colour purple, specifically Tyrian purple, pressed from the glands of sea snails, so potent and rare it was once worn only by kings. Now they bring it in jars sealed with wax, offering a tiny smear of it in exchange for your best goat cheese or a well-woven tunic. You try not to flinch when they smear it on cloth. It's like watching someone paint with sunset. But it's not just the goods that make them valuable. It's their connections. They've been to places you thought didn't exist anymore. Crete, Sicily, maybe even Egypt again. Their language is quick and slippery, full of borrowed words and clipped syllables. Their eyes flick constantly between the shore and the sails, always calculating, always moving. They remind you of the old world's traders, but leaner, sharper, trimmed down by necessity. No ceremonial robes, no entourage, just survival with flair. You spend a few days helping them unload and reload. In return, they teach you how to lash crates so they don't shift at sea. One of them, smiling, scarred, with a laugh like broken bells, shows you how to patch a cracked hull with tree resin and goat hair. You ask how they learned all this, and he shrugs. Same way everyone does now. Trial, error, running away at the right time. There's a strange confidence in them, not arrogance, not exactly. Just the calm of people who've been living in chaos long enough to stop panicking. They tell you that where others saw the collapse as an ending, they saw opportunity. As inland kingdoms fell, coastal communities became more important. Fewer taxes, fewer restrictions, more room to move. The sea became a highway, not a border. There's one Phoenician who speaks your dialect unusually well. She tells you about Byblos and Sidon, cities still clinging to the cliffs, still trading cedarwood and papyrus, still holding ceremonies in shrines carved into the rock. We adapt, she says. When others hoard, we trade. When others fight, we move. That's how you live. And then she pulls out something small, flat, carved into clay. You think it's a tablet at first, but no, it's something simpler. A series of symbols, curved, straight, clean. It's not linear B, it's not pictographic. It's alphabetic, 20-odd characters, one sound per symbol. She sees the look on your face and smiles. Fast to learn, easier to carry. Not just for kings and scribes. She teaches you the first few symbols, and you stumble over them like a toddler learning to walk. But there's something addictive about it. It makes sense. It doesn't require years in a temple or access to palace schools. Anyone could learn this, even you. You hear later from a wandering scholar, yes, those still exist, that the Phoenicians are the bridge between ages. They're preserving the bones of the old world, literacy, trade, navigation, but stripping out the bulk, the unnecessary flourishes. They don't build empires, they build networks, floating, shifting, always adapting. They're not trying to restore civilization, they're designing a new one, version 2.0, optimized for survival. There's a theory, fringe of course, that without the Phoenicians the alphabet wouldn't have spread. That modern writing, as you'll come to know it, wouldn't exist. That they jump-started literacy not with marble libraries, but with practical trade notes and shipping manifests, ink on linen, chalk on stone walls, letters for trade, letters for songs. You try writing your name in their script one night, scratching it onto driftwood with a bit of charcoal. It's shaky, uneven, but it's there. And for the first time, you feel a flicker of something you thought was lost when the temples crumbled. Legacy. Before they leave, the Phoenicians trade you a small clay tablet pressed with their alphabet, wrapped in oilcloth. You keep it like a charm, hidden in your pack, taking it out sometimes just to stare at the symbols. They look like the bones of words, like sound made solid. The thought that you can carry language now, not as a priest, not as a scribe, just as a person, that's a power you didn't know you missed until it was back in your hands. The ships sail out at dawn, purple sails glowing in the first light. You watch them until they vanish, wondering where they'll go next. Carthage, maybe. Sardinia. Some port where the people still know how to barter in 3 languages and trust only what they can sail with. You turn back inland, the tablet in your pocket and a few new words in your head. The Phoenicians are gone, but they've left you with more than goods. They've left you with the sense that the world is bigger again, that trade and travel and language aren't lost, just scattered. And you're starting to believe that maybe the world isn't rebuilding from its ruins. Maybe it's blooming from them. You notice it first around the fire, how people lean in when someone starts to speak, how the noise of the village fades to nothing except the sound of one voice rising above the crackle of flames. No writing, no books, no tablets, just words, spoken, remembered, carried like heirlooms in the minds of those still alive. The scribe is gone. The librarian too. What you have now is the storyteller. You watch him, a man not old but aged by experience. His hair is flecked with ash, or maybe that's just from the fire, and his voice is low, steady, slightly hoarse. Tonight's story is about a warrior who can't be killed, not because of his armour or strength, but because he remembers every battle he's ever seen, everyone else's as well as his own. His memory protects him, lets him predict every blow. But in the end, it's that same memory that undoes him. Too much pain, too much loss. He walks into the sea, not to die, but to forget. You sit in silence long after the story ends, the fire sputtering low, and you realise something. Stories are the new archive. They're how people are passing down knowledge, beliefs, fears, maps, survival tricks. Everything. And the strange part is, they're working. People still tell the old myths. Gilgamesh, Enlil, Ishtar. They've changed, of course. Names shift, details blur. Some characters trade faces depending on who's telling the tale, but they endure, and new ones are born, forged in the fire of collapse. Stories about villages defending themselves with clever tricks, or spirits that guide refugees at night, or wolves that only attack those who forget to share their bread. Truth, myth, doesn't matter. It's all the same now, useful, memorable, sticky. You notice that the best storytellers always include 3 things: rhythm, repetition, and meaning. They speak in beats, like song. They use the rule of 3s. 3 tests, 3 brothers, 3 days lost in the wilderness. There's a deep, almost biological satisfaction in it. You remember it without trying. A tale told well is like a seed planted in your skull. It grows whether you want it to or not. Someone in your village, an older woman with a limp and hands like knotted wood, tells only healing stories. She mixes herbs with tales. This leaf, she says, cures coughs, but only if you pluck it at dawn, like the shepherd who saved his wife from the mountain fever. She's turned medicine into narrative, and because of that, people remember. You've seen a 5-year-old gather healing plants in the exact pattern she described, muttering the story to herself like a spell. No scroll ever taught with such precision. That's the shift. The collapse didn't kill memory, it forced it to mutate. Instead of externalizing knowledge, writing it down, locking it in a vault, it now lives in the collective voice of the people. It's less stable, yes, prone to drift, but it's also faster, more accessible. Everyone is a student, everyone is a teacher. You sit with children, teaching them the tale of the cedar tree that refused to bend in the wind and was broken in the storm. It's a metaphor, sure, but it's also a lesson in adaptation. They laugh at the ending every time, the way the tree ends up as firewood, and you know they'll tell it again. Maybe not word for word, but close enough. Some scholars, those few lucky enough to piece together burnt scrolls and half-erased inscriptions centuries later, will say that this was the true beginning of oral epic, that the long-form, memorized stories that would one day become Homeric poems were being shaped right here, in the mouths of survivors like you. It's hard to imagine these bedtime tales becoming the Iliad, but maybe that's how it always works. Big things starting from small fireside moments, names passed down not because they were famous, but because they meant something. Fringe theories go even further, claiming that some stories were intentionally created to encode knowledge, proto-encyclopedias disguised as myth. A tale about a journey could map out trade routes. A myth about a flood might teach river patterns or seasonal risks. You don't know if it's true, but you've heard plenty of stories that feel suspiciously practical for something supposedly just a tale. You start telling stories too, not because you plan to, but because someone asks you to one night. Tell us what it was like, before, they say, and so you do. Haltingly at first, then with more rhythm. You find yourself crafting your memories into scenes, exaggerating a little here, cutting a little there. You watch their faces, see which parts land, which parts fall flat. You revise, you edit, you perform, and suddenly, you're not just remembering, you're shaping memory. Your version of events won't be perfectly accurate. That's the trade-off, but it'll survive. And the strange part is, that matters more. A dry list of facts doesn't help a child fall asleep in a dangerous world. But a story with rhythm, stakes, and a little hope, that's medicine. And here's something strange you never thought you'd say. Maybe forgetting a little is okay. Maybe some parts of the old world are better off wrapped in myth, softened around the edges. You remember the palaces, yes, but you also remember the corruption, the cruelty, the greed. In your stories, the kings are foolish or brave or tragic, but rarely divine. The scribes are clever, but not untouchable. The temples? Mysterious, not infallible. The stories let you tell the truth without telling the whole truth. That night you lie on your back under the stars, listening as someone else tells a tale. This one about a girl who outsmarts a demon using a pot of lentils and a chicken feather. You smile. It's new. You haven't heard this one before, it's ridiculous and brilliant and somehow probably true in ways no historian could ever measure. And you think, maybe this is what comes after writing. Not silence, not ignorance, but something messier, louder, more alive. A chorus of voices, a patchwork of memory, the human library rebuilt with breath. Your nose tells you before your eyes do. Something is off. It's that sour, cloying smell you've learned to dread. Not rot, not fire, but something in between. A living kind of decay. You pull your tunic up over your face as you enter the village and realise too late that you're walking into another outbreak. You've seen this before. It starts with a cough. Then comes the fever, the sweating, the shakes. After that, it's either recovery or a shallow grave. This time, it's a cluster of homes along a river bend. 3 already dead. One of them a child. The villagers are doing their best. Boiling water, separating the sick. But their best isn't always enough. You watch from a distance as 2 men, both pale with exhaustion, carry a body out of a hut wrapped in linen and fear. Disease didn't disappear with the palaces. If anything, it got smarter. When cities fell, people thought maybe the worst of it. The dense, plague-ridden quarters would fade too. But they didn't count on the new way people were living. Close, improvised, fragile. Villages weren't immune. If anything, they were perfect incubators. 1 bad meal, 1 infected water jug, 1 visitor with a cough. That's all it takes. You do what you can. Help bury the dead. Boil whatever can be boiled. Carry clean water in sealed jars, hand-washed with ash and river sand. You remember what the old woman in your last village told you? Never eat fish caught after a thunderstorm. Always burn the straw bedding after someone dies in it. Don't touch the sick unless you've smoked your hands over pine needles. You don't know if any of it works. But at this point, you'll try anything. Someone tries to blame the gods. It's a curse, they say. We buried the idol wrong. We stopped the festival too early. Others nod. They need a reason. They need to point somewhere. You can't blame them. But deep down, you know this isn't divine wrath. It's biology. Bad luck. Human closeness in a world that hasn't figured out sanitation yet. There's a fringe theory you once heard from a passing healer, that the collapse of the great cities didn't end disease. It just diversified it. Back then, cities had predictable plagues. Measles, dysentery, parasites that came with overpopulation. But now, disease travels with every refugee, every lost caravan, every rat that scurries into a grain pile. No one's keeping records. No one's charting symptoms. You've heard of whole villages going blind, of coughs that end with blood, of people who sleep for 3 days and never wake up. Some of these stories are exaggerated, you hope. Others, less so. And still, people persist. You meet a woman here, wrapped in 3 layers of cloth, who boils herbs and applies poultices to the sick without hesitation. She doesn't flinch at fever or bile. She tells you she lost her husband to a lung illness 2 winters ago and decided to learn everything she could after that. I can't bring people back, she says, stirring a dark mixture of honey, bark and ash. But maybe I can keep a few here longer. You want to believe her? You do. You stay a few extra days to help her. Learn a few things. How to tell when a fever's about to break. How to spot a sick animal before it spoils the milk. How to disinfect a wound using a hot iron knife, though you try very hard not to think about what that feels like. You grind herbs until your hands ache. You learn to listen to lungs with your ear pressed close, counting the breaths, watching for the gaps. One of the sick is a boy, maybe 9. Eyes wide, cheeks flushed, sweat glistening like dew. You sit beside him for hours, telling him stories to keep his mind busy. About a wolf who learned to speak human language and tricked a king out of his throne. About a tree that grew silver leaves. You're halfway through a story when you realize he's fallen asleep, breathing steady, for now. At night, you lie awake, trying not to cough, trying not to wonder whether you caught it. It's a gamble every time. You've known people who felt fine one day and were gone the next, but you also know you can't just walk away. Not anymore. Not after what you've seen. Not after the quiet, terrifying dignity of people who keep treating the sick, even after they've lost everyone they love. You help build a new quarantine shelter, not because anyone told you to, but because it needs to be done. Far from the main path, with good ventilation and a stream nearby. The walls are made of woven reeds and daubed with clay. You add charms to the door, just in case the gods are watching after all. Disease may not respect reason, but people still do what they can. You've seen this across every village, every region. The same makeshift hospitals, the same herbal knowledge passed like torches through the dark. No books, no doctors, no sterile instruments, just hands, memory and hope. Later, when the sickness starts to ease, you feel it like a fog lifting. People step out of their homes and blink at the sun. Someone starts a fire for cooking, and soon the scent of bread replaces that sour edge of death. You help gather wood, feed the goats, boil another pot of water even though it might not be needed today. Because habits keep people alive just as much as luck. The boy recovers. You don't say anything when he runs past you 2 days later, chasing a dog and laughing like the world never fell apart. You just watch him go, smiling faintly, and adjust the mask of cloth still tied around your face. Years from now, someone will tell a story about this time, about the sickness that nearly took them, about the woman with her bitter herbs, about the stranger who stayed to help. Maybe your name will vanish in the telling. Maybe you'll become a side character or a symbol or vanish entirely. That's fine. Because you'll know that when the disease came, you didn't run. You stayed. You fought it the only way people can now, with sweat, stories, and stubborn, relentless care. And sometimes, that's enough. It starts slowly, barely noticeable at first. A few more children laughing in the dust, 1 or 2 babies born in the same season, not just once a year, then 3, then 5. And before you realise it, your village, once a fragile knot of weary survivors, starts sounding like it has a future again. Someone builds a second hut, then a third, a larger grain pit, another well dug by the edge of the ravine. No grand proclamation, no ceremony, just the quiet, accidental arrival of something no one expected. A baby boom. You wouldn't think a civilizational collapse would lead to more children. After all, this is the age of scarcity, of hunger, of rebuilding from mud and memory. But here they are, toddling through the fields with half-tied sandals, tugging at goats' ears, babbling nonsense into the wind. And honestly, it's the most hopeful thing you've seen in years. Why now? Why here? It's not entirely clear. But in village after village, along crumbling coastlines and highland pastures, the same thing is happening. People are having kids again. Not just one, not just replacements for the dead, but families. Maybe it's because the chaos has begun to settle into routine. Maybe because people finally feel safe enough to try. Or maybe because that's what humans do when they think the worst is behind them. They grow. It's also, ironically, a side effect of the collapse. With the old power structures gone, no more palace levies, forced labour camps, citywide famines designed by greedy bureaucrats. People have more autonomy, more room to breathe, if not in luxury, then at least in peace. There are no taxes to pay in children, no wars pulling sons off to foreign lands, no kings demanding a generation of boys for a meaningless conquest. And so, children stay, and grow, and multiply. You remember when the village had only 2 children. Now, there are 11 under the age of 10. Someone even started teaching them songs, not religious hymns, not chants to dead gods, but counting songs, planting songs, stories that help them remember when to harvest figs or how to avoid thorn bushes. and the kids repeat them endlessly. Not because they have to, but because that's what children do. They mimic, they echo, they learn. There's a boy named Arian who builds small houses out of sticks and mud, mimicking the elders as they construct storage huts. His younger sister, only 3, insists on carrying pebbles from the river and stacking them into tiny altars. One child can imitate. A dozen? That's a culture forming. One night, you sit by the fire and notice something that stops you cold. A lullaby. A mother sings to her newborn, rocking back and forth, voice barely audible over the wind. You lean in, trying to catch the words. It's not one of the old songs. It's new, or at least it feels new. A mixture of remembered melody and recent grief, sung not for the gods, not for ceremony, but for comfort. It's soft, unpolished, true. You won't forget it. There's a fringe idea you've heard, passed from village to village like a rumour of light. Collapse clears the field, not just literally, in the burning of cities and the scattering of empires, but biologically. That when populations thin and the old orders vanish, nature fills the gap. You're not a scholar, but looking around at all the bare feet and scraped knees, you think they might be right. It's not all joy, of course. Babies mean more mouths to feed, more sickness, more accidents. A child chokes on a date pit. Another burns her hand in the cooking fire. You build better cradles. You dig deeper latrines. You add herbs to the evening stew that help keep fevers at bay. And still, you lose some. The grief is no less sharp than it ever was. But now it's balanced by something new. Expectation. People aren't just surviving, they're planning. They're naming their children not after lost ancestors, but after birds and rivers and stars. One man plants a grove of trees for my daughter's wedding, though she's only 6. No one laughs at him. Everyone just nods. It's a strange, quiet revolution. People behaving as if they believe the future is real. There's a new hut built near yours, housing a couple who arrived last spring. The woman's pregnant now, waddling slowly to the well each morning. You help her carry water some days. She tells you they lost their first baby years ago when they were still on the road, eating boiled roots and sleeping under rain-soaked leaves. We waited, she says, touching her stomach, until we had something to stay for. You don't ask what something is, you don't have to. A group of older children forms a sort of gang. Not dangerous, just chaotic. They chase chickens, raid the berry bushes, splash in the creek until they're soaked and covered in mud. You catch yourself watching them with an odd feeling in your chest. It's not envy. Not quite nostalgia either. It's a reminder that life didn't end when the cities did. It just shifted, moved into smaller bodies, dirtier feet, bigger questions. Scholars in the far future will look at this population bump and try to find patterns. Some will call it a rebound, others a rebuilding phase. But what they won't fully grasp is how strange it felt to trust again. To bring a child into a world where just a few years ago, you weren't even sure you'd make it through the winter. That's the real shift. Not birth rates, but belief. A man in your village begins building toys, yes, toys, out of scraps. Little animals carved from bone, wheels made from hollowed stones, a spinning top that works somehow even on uneven ground. He says they help children grow stronger hands. Everyone knows he just likes seeing them laugh. You trade him 2 cured hides for a miniature horse. You don't have kids of your own, you just want it near your fire. That night, as dusk wraps around the hills like a blanket, you sit with the new children and teach them the old stories. Your stories. They interrupt constantly, giggle at the wrong parts, and ask ridiculous questions. Did the sea really swallow a whole city? Can a man turn into a bird? Why are gods always mad? You don't have answers. You just keep telling the tale, letting their imaginations do the rest. And for the first time in what feels like forever, you let yourself believe. This world isn't dying anymore. It's growing. It begins with water. Almost always does. You and 4 others stand at the bend in the stream, watching it trickle over stones, thin but steady. Not a river exactly, but enough to work with. Someone sticks a wooden rod into the mud, marks the depth, nods. Another grunts in approval, spits into the dirt like it's a blessing. This spot, this narrow crescent of earth tucked between 2 hills, could work. No one says, let's build a civilization here. You just look at each other and start gathering stones. Step 1, find water. You'd heard that phrase before, passed down from travellers, old farmers, even healers who tied it to omens. If you want anything to last, people, crops, animals, even stories, you need water. Not too much, not too little. Just enough to keep the dust from claiming everything. So you mark the edge of the stream with stones and tie strips of cloth to nearby trees. You walk the area again and again, testing the soil with your fingers, looking for flat land that doesn't flood, slopes that won't collapse in rain, shaded groves for livestock. You do this not because you have a master plan, but because you've done it before, or watched others do it, and you're finally ready to stop drifting. Step 2. Share it. This is harder than finding water. People are stubborn. They carry trauma like kindling, ready to ignite over the smallest spark. But this time, something's different. Maybe it's the baby swaddled in reed baskets. Maybe it's the memory of too many cold nights sleeping under tarps. Or maybe, after years of grabbing and running and fighting, people are just tired. Tired enough to try together. The first few days you all work in silence, clearing brush, hauling stones, shaping crude ditches to divert the stream. No orders, no overseers, just a rhythm. Someone starts keeping count of hours by placing stones in a row, one per half day. It's not a calendar, but it's close. You've stopped counting days anyway. Time now feels different. Less linear, more circular. Step 3. Survive. That part you already know. You build your home a little uphill just out of the floodplain with walls made from woven branches caked in mud. The roof is low, sloped, packed with reeds. There's no door yet, just a cloth drape to keep insects out. Inside it smells of earth, smoke, and sweat. Outside, someone is building a clay oven. Someone else has started shaping a proper granary. Thicker walls, higher base, rodent-proof if you're lucky. You nod at them in passing. No one speaks much yet, but you're starting to understand each other. And here's the wild part. There's no blueprint. No scroll handed down from a king. No wise elder shouting commands. Just shared need and stubborn effort. It's slow, yes, and messy. The irrigation ditch floods the wrong section on the first try. A wall collapses in the rain. The oven smokes too much. But these are the kinds of problems that feel good to solve, because they're yours. One evening, as the sun sinks behind the ridge, someone brings out a flat stone with carved markings. It's not writing. Not quite. More like symbols. A spiral for water, a square for house, a scratch for firewood. They lay it on the ground near the granary. People gather around it nodding. It's crude, maybe meaningless to outsiders, but to you, it's the first draft of a shared language. A way to mark who contributed what, who gets which share, who needs help. It's not governance, but it's order. A few days later, someone suggests setting a rule. No taking from the grain pile without another person present. Not because you don't trust each other, but because trust is easier when it's visible. Someone else builds a stand for shared tools. Someone marks a section of land for common grazing. These aren't laws. There's no punishment written in stone. But slowly, your little cluster of huts is becoming more than a camp. It's becoming a system, one that works. You remember what the world was like before. Layers of hierarchy, enforced rituals, kings and temples and armies, everything controlled from the top, efficient until it wasn't. One failure in the chain, and the whole system collapsed like overbaked bread. What you're building now? It's not efficient, not elegant, but it bends. When something breaks, you fix it. When someone leaves, someone else steps in. A stranger arrives from another valley, bone-thin, half-starved, missing 3 fingers on one hand. You offer food, space, a quiet corner near the stream. He offers nothing in return. Not at first, but the next day he's helping rebuild the collapsed wall. A week later he teaches someone how to cure hides using pine ash and smoke. A month after that, he's carving new symbols into the community stone. "Why here?" he asks one night, sitting beside you, warming his hands over the fire. Why not somewhere safer? You think for a moment, then shrug. "We had water, and no one told us not to." He laughs. A real one. First you've heard from him. You decide to mark that too. Some historians, looking back through the dust of time, will see villages like yours and call them proto-states. Others will call them intentional communities, or neo-tribal formations. Doesn't matter. You'll never hear those terms. All you know is that without ceremony or design, you and a few dozen strangers became something larger than yourselves. Not a city, not an empire, just a beginning. A child is born here, the first since the camp was founded. Not in a hut, but in the open air, beneath the shade of a fig tree, her first cry echoing through the valley like a promise. Someone picks up a burnt stick and adds a new mark to the community stone. 2 lines and a curve. You don't ask what it means. Everyone seems to know already. You've seen collapse, you've walked through ruins, you've survived. But this is the first time you've felt like you're living again. The first sign that something's really shifting is the way people start talking about next year. Not just in passing, like a hope or a joke, but seriously. We'll expand the barley patch next year. Let's try digging a second well in the spring. I'll show the kids how to trap quail once the frost ends. That kind of talk didn't exist during the collapse, not even close. Back then, survival was counted in hours, sometimes days if you were lucky. Now there's the beginnings of what you could almost call planning. You wake early most mornings now, not because of fear, but because the chickens are loud and someone's already starting the fire for the day's baking. The village smells like wood smoke, yeast and livestock, the kind of warm, dirty scent that says people are living here, not just passing through. You step outside your hut and stretch, and all around you people are already moving, hauling water, gathering eggs, checking the garden plots. Life feels like it has rhythm again. The fields are fuller this year. Wheat, barley, lentils, even some wild flax someone managed to coax into rows. Your neighbours tried an experiment, intercropping legumes and grain, and to everyone's surprise it worked. The legumes fixed nitrogen in the soil and the barley came up stronger than before. You don't understand all the details, but the soil is darker, richer, and the stalks stand taller. There's a man in the village now who's obsessed with irrigation. He digs canals like he's building his way to the underworld, always muttering about slope, gravity, water pressure. The first few ditches he cut just made puddles. The next ones turned half the village path into mud. But now somehow there's a neat little system. 3 branches fed by a spring-fed stream, trickling into the fields and even a bathing trough. A bathing trough. You haven't seen anyone willingly soak in clean water since the cities fell. The kids in the village have chores now. Not punishment, just participation. They gather kindling. They stir mash. They shoo goats away from drying laundry. One girl even figured out how to weave baskets that don't unravel at the corners. Her fingers are faster than yours, and when she teaches you, you don't take it as an insult. That's the new rule around here. Whoever knows how to do it best gets to lead. Doesn't matter if they're 8 or 80. And it's not just agriculture. There's structure forming around everything. One woman keeps track of who brought what to the granary, not as a tally to shame or tax, but as a way to make sure no one is forgotten. Everyone eats, she says, and everyone helps. The words have become something like a motto. Someone carved them into a piece of driftwood and nailed it to the main post of the longhouse. You never thought you'd be moved by something so simple. You're watching, in real time, as your community rebuilds from the roots. And the roots are strong. A man arrives from the north, hobbling slightly, wrapped in layers of wool. He carries a wooden tube sealed with wax, and inside is something you haven't seen in years, a hand-drawn map. Crude, yes, but it shows valleys, rivers, even names. Some new, some old. He says he's been mapping out safe zones. Places where things are starting to grow again, he says. Not just crops. People he spends a few nights trading stories and marking up your surroundings. By the time he leaves, your village is on the map, marked with a small symbol of a sprouting tree. Spring root, someone jokes. We should call it spring root. The name sticks, and that's the other strange thing. You're getting names again. Not just for people, but for places, objects, roles. The woman who keeps the water clean is now the stream keeper. The guy who patches everyone's roofs is called Sky Mender. The woman who sings while harvesting herbs is the green voice. These aren't titles with power. They're titles with meaning. You find yourself wanting one, not for pride, but to belong. You start keeping a notebook, just scraps of leather tied together with flax thread. You record planting times, weather patterns, births, and deaths. It's not for show, it's for memory. You don't want to forget how far you've come or how easy it is to slide backward. There's a moment, quiet, unassuming, where you realise you've stopped worrying about immediate disaster. You're still cautious, yes, still listen for distant screams, still sleep with a knife nearby. But that old edge of panic? It's gone dull. Your village has a surplus, a small one, enough that you traded some to another settlement 2 valleys away for smoked fish and new seeds. You sent a delegation. They came back with more than goods. They came back with news. Other places are rising too. A village by the salt flats has developed a method to boil brine more efficiently. Another near the hills is mining iron with clay-lined furnaces. There's even talk of a shared meeting. Leaders from each village gathering to discuss trade, road safety, maybe even shared rituals. You don't get your hopes up, but still, the fact that people are trying feels revolutionary. There's debate in the village about whether to build a wall. Not out of fear, more for symbolism. Let them know this place has roots, someone says. Others argue it could make you a target. You just listen, amazed that people are thinking years ahead, arguing not about survival but about identity. You realise that's what's happening here. People are beginning to imagine themselves as part of something larger, something continuous. Historians, when they dig through the remains of places like Springroot, will call this the reformation of kinship societies, a return to cooperative models, bound by shared labour and oral law rather than bureaucracy. But those are just words. You don't feel like you're part of a theory. You feel like you're part of a group that knows each other's birthdays. One night, under a full moon, the village gathers in a circle to tell stories. Not just old ones either. New tales. One boy tells of a crow who teaches a farmer to catch fish by whistling to the wind. Another woman tells a love story that ends not with marriage, but with a shared garden. The crowd cheers. You think, this is how memory works now. It's not about preserving the past. It's about planting it into the present. The fire burns low, someone yawns, a baby cries. You walk back to your hut slowly, the scent of roasting herbs still clinging to your clothes. You built something here, and it's growing. It's the third time this month someone brings you a thing you recognise, but only vaguely. This time it's a curved piece of bronze with faded etchings. Maybe part of a hinge, maybe a fragment of a ceremonial bowl. No one knows for sure. But they found it half buried in the hills east of the village, where the ground sometimes spits out pieces of the past like it's tired of holding them. You turn it over in your hands, weighing it not just for mass but for memory. This object belonged to the old world, but now it belongs to you. It's strange how much of that old world still lingers. Not in grand cities or intact statues. Those are mostly gone, buried or broken or cannibalized for building material, but in pieces, shards, leftovers, ghosts. You find them everywhere. The base of a column being used as a stool, a shattered amphora now functioning as a bird bath, a collapsed gatehouse turned into the back wall of someone's pig pen. The past didn't vanish, it just got repurposed. You live among these ruins without even thinking about it most days. Your house has a foundation that was once the outer wall of a granary. The steps you walk down each morning are older than your grandmother's grandmother. Someone painted over an old mural in one of the huts. Crude animals drawn in charcoal over what looks like the remains of a procession. Fine-limbed figures in faded ochre robes. You don't know who they were. You don't know what they were doing. But they're here, now, beneath your walls, behind your drawings, still whispering. The artifacts come with no explanations, no labels. Just objects divorced from their context, like bones pulled out of a shared grave. And yet, they speak. A bronze figurine suggests someone once worshipped here. A hoard of corroded blades buried beneath an olive tree hints at fear, or preparation, or maybe a desperate attempt to save something that never got used. A painted shard, thin as eggshell, tells you that beauty once mattered, even if no one remembers the artist's name. Some of your neighbours call these things relics, others call them junk. A few call them omens, depending on what mood they're in. One man believes the broken idols still hold power. He refuses to enter any structure where he finds them buried in the foundation. Another woman collects pieces of worked metal and melts them down to make tools, insisting the ancestors would have wanted them put to good use. You suspect the ancestors have no opinion. They're long gone, but the argument keeps things interesting. You've started to notice how much of your life is built on the skeleton of the past. Your village path follows the route of an old aqueduct. Your best clay is dug from the collapsed cistern of a former bathhouse. Your goats graze among the overgrown remains of what was probably a marketplace. You don't think about it all the time, but when you do, it hits you hard. You're walking through a world of ruins. Not in it, through it. Every step is a conversation with what came before, and yet it doesn't feel like you're haunted. It feels more like inheritance. Not the kind passed down with gold and ceremony, but the kind you stumble across while foraging, unwanted, unmarked, but yours all the same. There's a fringe belief growing among the younger villagers, especially those born after the collapse. that the old world was never real. Not entirely. That the stories of cities with golden gates and feasts for hundreds are exaggerations. That people never really flew flags from ships or carved laws into stone. You understand the impulse. The past feels mythic now, so distant it may as well be another planet. And when someone points to a broken pot and says, "This proves it," you see doubt in their eyes. Maybe it's all a trick. Maybe we were never more than this. But then someone uncovers a whole chamber. It's deep in the hills behind a landslide triggered by last winter's rains. A few herders followed a goat into a fissure and found a stone-lined passage. You go with the others, holding a torch and ducking low. Inside, a storeroom miraculously intact. Walls lined with cracked jars, a few bronze blades on a rusted rack, carvings on the wall, some depicting harvests, others battles. And at the far end, a stone seat, once painted, now flecked with lichen. It's real. It's all real. The city fell, but its bones remain. You help catalogue what you can. Not for science. There's no university anymore. Just for memory. People draw pictures of the carvings on bark and stone. They carry artifacts back in cloth bundles. One man insists on sealing the chamber again after they're done. "Let it rest," he says. "It survived longer without us." And now something strange begins to happen. These pieces of the past start showing up everywhere. Not just physically, but in conversation, in practice, in spirit. Someone begins weaving fabric in patterns inspired by a painted shard. A blacksmith tries forging a knife in the shape of a recovered blade, though the balance is off. Kids play near the ruins and invent names for fallen columns. Giant's Tooth, Sky Stick, the Watcher. These aren't just artifacts now, they're becoming myths. Again, it's a kind of resurrection, but not of empires or kings. Just of the little things, the shapes, the songs, the curiosity. You realise that your culture, your village, your life is not made despite the collapse. It's made with it. Like compost, the old world is rotting into something new, richer, messier, more alive, and you're the gardeners. That night, someone lights a fire near a half-collapsed temple wall. Not to worship, just to be near it. They sing a harvest song. Not an ancient one, not a new one, something in between. And you sit there, watching sparks rise toward the stars, realizing that the past isn't gone. It's just recycling. You don't talk about it much, not directly, but it's there. That feeling that the sky could fall again, that the world, even in its half-healed state, might still be hollow underneath. People carry it in their shoulders, in the way they pause when a stranger arrives, in how they always check the food jars twice, even when they know they're full. Some call it caution, some call it superstition. But deep down, you know what it really is. Collapse trauma. It's in you too. You notice it most in quiet moments, when everything seems calm, when the fire's burning low and the wind is soft and the children are finally asleep. That's when your body expects something to go wrong. A scream, a sickness, a blade, anything. You've been wired for disaster for so long that peace feels like a trick. No one teaches you how to live after a collapse. There are no scrolls for that, no rituals. The old world had ceremonies for birth, death, planting, war. But nothing for what happens when the whole system falls apart and you have to build yourself again from splinters. So you just do your best. You carry what you remember, you adapt. But the ghosts follow you. There's a man in the village, maybe 60, who talks in his sleep. You share a wall with him, so you hear it. Sometimes it's nonsense, muttered words, half-finished prayers. Other times, it's names. You asked once, gently, who they were. He didn't answer. Just looked at you like someone who'd seen a library burn. You never asked again. A woman near the West Path refuses to eat anything stored in sealed jars. Says she saw a village die from spoiled grain once. She makes her own food every day, fresh, from scratch, no matter how tired she is. People laugh, call her the baker who never sleeps, but you watch her and you understand. It's not just habit, it's a wound. Even the children show signs. One girl screams if left alone for more than a few minutes. A boy hoards berries under his sleeping mat, even though he eats well now. You don't punish them, you just adjust. Build routines around their fears, let them keep their secret stashes. One day, they'll stop, or not. Healing isn't linear, and no one's rushing anyone anymore. There's a fringe belief some people whisper about. Collapse memory, they call it. The idea that trauma gets passed down, Not just through stories, but through bodies. That fear can live in blood. That descendants of disaster carry echoes of it, like shadows sewn into their muscles. You don't know if it's true, but it feels right. You didn't live through the fall of the biggest cities, but you feel them. You dream of crumbling walls, of fire in the streets, of the endless silence that comes after the screaming ends. Even the holidays have changed. The old calendar is broken, its gods gone, its meanings hollowed out, but new rhythms have formed. You've noticed the village gets quiet around the same time every year, the first cool nights after harvest. No one says why, but fewer jokes get told. People move slower, fires burn longer. You think they're remembering, not a date, a feeling. The turn in the wind when everything changed. Someone recently carved a new pattern onto the gathering stone in the square. 5 slashes crossing a circle. No one explained it, but it spread quickly. It's been etched onto tools, doorposts, even someone's shoulder. You think it means we've been through it. Maybe even we're still here. That shared scar is a kind of glue. You've seen people come together faster, tighter, more willingly than before. Arguments still happen, sure, but grudges don't last long. When you've watched the world collapse once, you don't waste energy pretending your neighbours are the enemy. Forgiveness comes easier. So does gratitude. You hear of another village 2 valleys away where they've created a ritual of rebuilding. Every year they burn a small hut on purpose, then rebuild it together, as a community. It's symbolic, they say, a way of reminding themselves that destruction doesn't have to be the end. Some people scoff. Others say it's beautiful. You think it's both. You start having conversations with people who never used to talk about before. One man tells you how he lost 3 brothers in the first year, not to war or disease, but to panic. They fled in different directions and never reconnected. He still checks the road sometimes, hoping. Another woman admits she used to be a noble's daughter, lived in a stone house with coloured walls. Now she digs clay with her hands and teaches children how to clean their water jars. She says she's happier, then she says she doesn't know if that's true. Your own memories come in flashes. A room lit by oil lamps. A song your mother hummed when it rained. The sound of sandals on marble floors. You don't know what happened to the people from that part of your life. They may be alive somewhere. They may be long gone. The past doesn't leave you, but it doesn't always follow either. And slowly you begin to see that everyone around you carries their own version of the end. Some bury it deep. Some wear it on their skin. But it's there. Part of the invisible architecture of the new world. Not a flaw, a foundation. There's healing, yes, but it doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning how to live with memory in the room, sharing space with it, feeding it sometimes, then asking it to sit quietly while you plant onions. One evening you catch yourself laughing, really laughing, at a joke someone tells about a goat and a missing sandal. It's dumb, it's perfect. And when you stop laughing, you realise you feel light, not empty. Light. That's when you understand surviving is one thing. But healing? Healing is when you laugh again without checking the sky first. You don't know who starts it. Maybe it was inevitable. Maybe someone just woke up one morning and decided it was time. But one day, without fanfare or formal declaration, people begin teaching again. Not in the old way, with tablets and strict syllables carved into stone, but something looser, more human. Children gathering in the shade of a tree. A woman drawing in the dirt with a stick. A group of teenagers arguing about where the stars go during the day. There are no classrooms here, no chalk, no bells. But somehow you've got yourself a school. It doesn't look like much. Some flat stones arranged in a circle. A carved plank to sit on if your legs are tired. But it hums with energy. This patch of earth where questions live. What's the best way to plant millet near a stream? What happens if you mix honey with dried mint? Why do frogs sing before it rains? You hear these questions asked like riddles, and then answered by the group, not with certainty, but with curiosity, with a willingness to wonder out loud. You remember what learning used to look like, rigid rows, harsh correction, information hoarded and passed down like rations. That world, those palaces of knowledge, are dust now. But here, learning is collaborative, it's joyful, it's a little chaotic. The kids don't sit still. They argue. They mimic bird calls mid-lesson. One of them, a boy with a missing front tooth, insists a rainbow is the sky's apology after yelling too loud. No one corrects him. They just laugh, and someone adds, maybe it's a gift for plants. and suddenly you've got a working theory on atmospheric blessings. The teachers are whoever knows the most about a thing. The old shepherd teaches counting with pebbles. The potter shows kids how to read clay for cracks. A teenager who spent months on the coast explains how tides shift depending on the shape of the moon. You contribute too, sharing what you've learned about soil rotation, or how to test a rope's strength by wrapping it around your palm in 3 loops. It's not formal, but it sticks. Every now and then someone will ask, but how did they do it before? And you'll realise how little you actually know about the pre-collapse knowledge. You've forgotten things. Everyone has. The old systems are like a language you once spoke fluently, but now only remember in fragments. You don't pretend otherwise. Instead, you make space for the unknown. You tell the students, let's figure it out together. One girl, maybe 8, develops an obsession with constellations. She carves patterns into bark, mapping where the stars appear each night. She names them herself, since the old names are mostly lost. That's the goat, she says, pointing upward, because she watches the mountain. Her twin brother insists that a clump of stars is called the fish that never stops. You ask him why, and he says, because it's always running and it's never caught. He says it like a proverb, like something he didn't make up but inherited. There's a debate over whether to start writing things down. One man argues that memory is enough, that stories and songs preserve better than symbols. Another wants to adopt the Phoenician script, with its smooth, clever characters. You stay out of it at first. But then someone gives you a smooth plank and a stick dipped in berry juice, and you find yourself writing anyway. Not because you want to preserve knowledge forever, just because it feels good to make a mark, something that might survive you. A travelling group arrives one afternoon, having heard about the teaching circle. Among them is a woman who once studied under a scribe long before the collapse. She speaks slowly, like someone not used to being heard. But when she draws symbols in the dirt, everyone crowds close. She shows how each sound can be carved, how thoughts can live outside the body. It's like a spell. You see it hit the children like lightning. You mean we can trap our thoughts and send them across time? It's a fragile kind of power, but it's real. You begin recording things in earnest, lists of plants, the seasons they bloom, what the stars looked like on a night when the crops came early. You ask the elders to tell their stories again, and this time you write them down, not perfectly, not for glory, just so that someone someday might remember that you were here. There's a ceremony of sorts when the first of these new books is finished. Not a feast, food still too precious, but a gathering. Everyone touches the pages, one by one, quietly, like it's a sacred animal. A child reads aloud the first page. This is what we know. So far and no one laughs. Not because it's serious, but because it's true. That's the spirit of this new education. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not hierarchy, but conversation. Not preservation, but participation. A few of the older folks are wary. They worry that all this writing down will make people lazy, that memory will weaken, that tradition will slip. Maybe they're right. But even they admit, when they see the youngest children drawing stars and symbols on their skin with soot and berry dye, that something important is happening. You lie awake one night under a cloudless sky, the air warm and still, and think about what it means to learn in a world without walls, to teach in a world where no one claims authority, to raise children in a world where asking why is an invitation, not a challenge. And then you think, this is what schools were always meant to be, not factories for facts, but gardens for wonder. You wake to the sound of drums, not fast, not urgent, just a low, steady rhythm echoing through the trees. It's early, still grey with morning fog, but already people are moving. You rub your eyes and step outside to see children with ash-streaked faces, women weaving herbs into garlands, and the village square slowly filling with painted stones, feathers, baked bread, and carved bone trinkets. You're not sure who decided today would be the festival. It just happened, like the seasons, like breath. It doesn't have a name, not officially. Some people call it the gathering, others say renewal day. A few elders shrug and just call it today. But you know what it really is. The first real celebration since the world fell apart. Not a meal of desperation, not a solemn ritual, a celebration. The drums continue. Now there are flutes, reed pipes made by a boy with chipped teeth and a surprisingly good ear for pitch. He taught himself how to play by listening to the wind whistle through hollow logs. He says he's trying to copy the birds. Honestly, he's not far off. Someone lights a fire, not for cooking, just for watching. a spiralling flame in the centre of the square, with stones placed around it for seating. There's no officiant, no high priest, just a general agreement. Today, we gather. Today, we remember the good. Today, we give thanks, not to the old gods, not necessarily to the new, but to each other. It starts with food, always food. Baskets of flatbread, steaming roots, fermented goat's milk, honey walnut cakes made with flour saved from last season's grain surplus. You see people exchanging gifts, hand-carved toys, woven bands, a comb made from antler. No one expects anything in return. It's the kind of generosity that makes your chest ache a little. Then come the stories. A woman stands by the fire and tells a tale about the river spirit who weaves silver fish into her hair. A man counters with a tale of a fire demon who only dances on the darkest nights. The children join in with absurd adventures involving flying chickens and talking mushrooms. It's half theatre, half nonsense, but no one cares. The point isn't the accuracy, it's the sharing. You notice something during the laughter. People are making eye contact again. Long, lingering, easy eye contact. You haven't seen that in years. After the collapse, everyone looked down, looked away. Now, they look into each other. That alone feels like a miracle. As the sun climbs higher, someone suggests a contest. Who can make the tallest tower using only river stones? It sounds ridiculous, but suddenly there are 3 teams, and within minutes people are wading into the shallows, shouting, laughing, stacking carefully. The towers wobble, fall, rise again. The winning structure stands about hip high before the top stone topples dramatically into the mud, splashing everyone in range. No prizes, just applause and wet feet. There's music now, real music. The flutes are joined by clapping, drumming, and something that might be a crude lyre made from stretched hide and bent wood. People dance, not like they did in the temples. No rigid moves, no rehearsed sequences. This is dancing for the sake of movement. You watch a man with a limp sway in time with the beat, supported by a woman laughing so hard she can barely keep her balance. They're terrible dancers. They're beautiful dancers. You think of the old festivals, the ones ruled by class, by duty, by ritual. You remember how ornate everything was. The robes, the gold-threaded banners, the long silent processions under starlight. This isn't that. There's no grandeur here, no perfection, but God's, it's alive. A few of the elders begin humming a song no one has sung in years, something from the old days. A harvest tune, slow and winding. One by one, people pick it up. You recognise a line, then another, and suddenly the whole square is singing, half in harmony, half off key, but together. The song wraps around you like a warm wind, and you don't even realise you're crying until someone bumps your shoulder and grins, holding out a cup of hot tea. Drink, they say, before the song ends. Later, as the sun slips down and everything turns golden, someone makes a small announcement. A girl is coming of age. She stands nervously near the fire, holding a bundle of dried herbs and a token stone carved with her name. There's no speech, no formal rite. She just steps into the circle and says, "I'm ready to take my place." And everyone claps. That's it. That's enough. The stars appear, and the stories get weirder. The fire crackles. Someone passes around roasted seeds, and someone else hands you a warm blanket. You lie back on the dirt, the kind that doesn't feel dirty anymore, and watch as the moon climbs above the trees. Around you, laughter drifts into the night air like incense. Quiet, steady, earned. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. Maybe a storm will come. Maybe nothing will change. But today, your people danced. They feasted. They remembered who they were. Not kings or servants, not survivors or victims, just people, living, together. And maybe that's what culture really is. Not something carved into stone, but something passed from hand to hand, voice to voice, moment to moment. Like tonight. You wake the next morning with sore feet, a crust of ash on your cheeks, and the vague sense that your dreams had been humming along to the rhythm of last night's flutes. The embers from the central fire are still warm, barely glowing under a blanket of ash. A few early risers are sweeping the square. One boy sleeps curled around a carved goat figurine, his face streaked with dirt and joy. The festival is over, but something lingers in the air, like the echo of a heartbeat just after it stops. As you gather your things and stretch the stiffness from your back, you think about everything you've lived through. Storms, famines, war, silence, recovery, and something clicks. This world, the one you've stitched together from shreds and instincts, works. Not perfectly, not easily, but undeniably. And more than that, it's starting to carry its own momentum. People are building more than huts and harvest cycles now. They're building meaning. That meaning looks different in every village. You visit a nearby community a few days later, following a trail lined with stacked stones and small bone markers, and you're stunned by what you find. A hilltop shrine, open to the wind, covered in painted shells and polished river stones. Not a temple. Not a place of sacrifice or offerings. Just a quiet spot where people leave things that matter to them. A grandmother's bracelet. A child's first carved toy. A broken tool that once worked well. The locals call it the remembering place. They don't guard it. They don't pray to it. They just add to it. One man explains, "We don't leave things for gods. We leave them for each other, so we don't forget." You press your fingers to a smooth stone etched with a single spiral and feel a pang in your chest. Not sadness, not grief, just recognition. You start seeing these little sites everywhere. A crossroad marked with woven grasses refreshed weekly. A sacred oak where people whisper names into the bark. A streambed painted with circles and lines. Messages in a new visual language no one's formally taught, but everyone seems to understand. These aren't just remnants of the old world. They're adaptations. Rituals reborn from need, not command. Spirituality without structure, belief without bureaucracy. One night, a group of travellers passes through your village and shares a story. Far to the west, people are building a new kind of monument. Not to gods, to survival. Stones stacked in tall spirals, one for every year since the collapse. Inside each spiral, small chambers hold offerings. Tools, stories, maps, even jokes. Because if the world ends again, the storyteller says with a crooked smile, we want the next version of us to laugh too. There's a quiet debate growing. Nothing formal, but something you hear murmured near fires passed between trading partners. What is sacred now? The old gods feel distant. The statues, mostly broken. The names, jumbled. But people still need to believe in something, so they believe in each other, in children, in the soil, in days like yesterday, when laughter outlasted fear. You once thought the collapse would kill religion. Instead, it shattered it into 1,000 little shards, each one picked up by a different hand and polished into something new. One village lights candles at the base of every new structure to invite the spirit of shelter. Another leaves bits of grain at the edge of the field for the blessing birds. A woman you meet insists her dreams predict weather patterns. You laugh, until her prediction of rain, down to the hour, comes true. You ask her how she knows. She shrugs. Maybe I'm just lucky. Maybe the clouds talk to me. Maybe they do. You see more and more people wearing charms, not the kind that once marked rank or allegiance, but symbols of comfort. A twisted bit of wire, a button from an old tunic, a sun carved into clay. No two are the same, and no one judges anyone else's. You wear one too now, a bead from the old Phoenician trader's sash, tied around your wrist with fraying twine. You touch it without thinking sometimes, especially when things feel fragile. And then there's the sky. One of the kids in your village has begun mapping the stars with a kind of devotion you can't help but admire. He sleeps by day and scribbles by night, drawing constellations with sticks and stones, naming each one as if he's the first to ever see them. That one's the cradle, he says, pointing upward. It holds all the others when the sky gets tired. You ask if he made that up. He shrugs. It just feels true. That's the current running through everything now. A shift from certainty to feeling, from law to law, from doctrine to meaning-making. People no longer ask, is it true? They ask, does it help? That, you think, is what belief looks like in the world after collapse. And belief, it turns out, isn't fragile. It's just flexible. You find yourself keeping rituals you never planned. Washing your hands in river water before telling stories. Burying the first clump of dirt when planting. Leaving the last bite of a meal near your doorway. For those who aren't here, you don't know where these habits came from. Maybe you made them up. Maybe someone else did. Maybe it doesn't matter. They help. That's enough. Even silence has become sacred. At sunset, the village naturally falls quiet. Not because someone told them to, but because the light becomes too beautiful to interrupt. You sit with your back against a warm wall, watching the shadows stretch, listening to the breeze comb through the wheat. For a long moment, no one speaks. No one needs to. In the absence of temples, the world itself has become the sanctuary. You used to think belief required power. Now you see it requires presence, attention, a willingness to sit with mystery and not demand it explain itself. One of the elders puts it best, murmuring after a long walk through the hills, "The gods aren't gone. They just learned to speak quieter. And maybe that's enough." The first letters arrive tied to birds. They're crude, half drawings, half scribbles, but unmistakably intentional. One is wrapped around a pigeon's leg with a dyed string. Another comes rolled into a little reed tube dropped at the edge of a field by a hawk that doesn't seem entirely wild. The words, where they're legible, are fragmented. Grain ready, rain soon, travellers north, safe, we return soon. Messages, real ones, from outside. The news spreads fast, not because it's dramatic, but because it's quiet and strange, like a voice you didn't realise you missed until you heard it again. There are other villages, other people, reaching out. And they figured out ways to do it. You help build the first message post, a high perch of smooth stone and woven sticks, where birds can land and messengers can leave tokens, scraps, scrolls. The birds are trained, partially. They don't always go where they should, but sometimes they do. And when they land with a new message, someone runs to ring the little clay bell strung by the gate. Everyone gathers. Someone reads it aloud, even when it makes little sense. Even when the writing is little more than squiggles and smudged charcoal. Communication, after years of silence, feels like a kind of resurrection. Soon after, a walking messenger arrives, an older man with sharp eyes and a staff carved with symbols from 5 different regions. He's been travelling the valleys, he says, stitching a network. Not an empire, he insists, just understanding. He carries messages, maps, samples of tools and seeds from other settlements. His pack is heavy and his bones creak when he moves, but his smile could crack granite. He stays a few nights, trading stories by firelight. He tells you of a fishing village that rebuilt its boats using blueprints etched on shell fragments, of a mountain clan that's learned to harvest heat from deep caves, warming whole homes in winter, of a desert outpost where people write messages on sun-bleached bone and trade them as sacred artifacts. It's all coming back, he says. Not the old world, but something. The next morning he gives you a folded square of bark. On it, a list of settlements, coordinates, markings. It's not a map, not exactly, but a directory. A rough idea of who's out there, and how to reach them. Your village is on it, spring route, drawn with a crooked little tree, and just like that you're part of something. There's talk of sending your own messenger, someone young, nimble, good with animals. There's debate over who should go. Eventually 2 volunteers step forward. A teenage girl with a head full of practical questions, and a man who once lived in the saltlands and still walks like he's expecting the ground to shift. They're given packs, dried rations, a reed scroll of greetings written in 5 dialects, and a carved token bearing your village's symbol. They leave before dawn, walking down the ridge path with the quiet tension of people who know the world is watching. And in a way, it is. In their absence, you feel the pull of connection growing stronger. People begin trading knowledge more freely, not just goods, but ideas. Someone suggests a unified set of symbols for communication. Not a full language, but a shared shorthand. A drawing of 3 waves to mean safe water, a spiral for news ahead, a handprint to mean we passed this way. It spreads like wildfire. You start seeing these marks carved into tree trunks, painted on stones, scratched into door lintels. A grassroots language rising from the dust. Another fringe idea begins to float around. This one from the hill folk who speak in metaphor and never raise their voices. They say the collapse didn't end the world. It just redistributed it. The pieces broke apart, one says, so they could learn to speak to each other. You don't fully understand it, but it makes you feel hopeful. The messengers return weeks later, leaner, sunburnt, grinning. They carry news, 9 villages, 3 of which you've never even heard of. They have lists of goods, barter offers, healing remedies, a new method for preserving fruit in ash and salt. One group has begun tracking time again, using moon cycles and flood markers. Another has mapped the stars and given them new names. One village even asked if there's interest in organising a yearly gathering, a meeting of settlements to trade, sing, teach, remember. And suddenly the future doesn't just feel possible, it feels collaborative. You gather with the others at night to talk about it, not to decide everything, just to listen, to imagine, to ask. What kind of world do we want to build now? You talk about roads, not the wide paved ones of the old empires, but footpaths lined with carved posts and waystones, a network of safe trails, shared symbols, common rules. No weapons within fire circles, shelter for all travellers. Leave what you can, take what you need. Not law, understanding. A few elders caution against moving too fast. The last time the world got big, one says, it got cruel. No one argues, but no one wants to stay small forever either. This time you'll build it slowly, carefully, with roots, not walls. You look at the stars and think of all the fires burning on other hills tonight, other villages, other people. You are not alone. You haven't been for some time, but now, finally, you feel it. That night someone starts carving a new post for the central square, a tall one, smooth and strong, with space for dozens of symbols. At the top they carve the spiral, below it the handprint, and beside it the tree. Springroot, the village that rose from memory. The stars are out again. Not as cold tonight, and not as scattered as they used to feel. You lie on your back outside your hut, your hands folded behind your head, and above you the constellations seem less distant, less like ancient fires and more like signposts, like something guiding you somewhere. Maybe not to cities or empires or the kind of future with towers and wheels and endless noise, but to something quieter, something shared. Around you, the village settles into its usual rhythm. A child crying, a goat's sleepy grunt, the last crackles of a cooking fire as someone stirs embers and covers them for the night. You hear low voices, two people trading stories, laughing gently, and farther off, the soft flap of a bird's wings, maybe one of the messenger pigeons returning home. Maybe it brought something with it, maybe not. Either way, someone will check in the morning. This is how it is now, a world without the weight of old kings or the clamour of bronze-choked armies. No taxes carved into stone, no gods with golden teeth demanding your best goat, no perfect roads stretching across a brittle map. All of that broke, all of it fell, and yet here you are, still breathing, still learning, still laughing, still building something new out of the bones of something old. You don't need a monument to prove you are here. You've planted seeds, you've taught children, you've remembered the names of those who didn't make it. That's your legacy now. Not a temple, not a crown, but a rhythm, a way of life. A second chance made out of sticks and songs and shared meals. And maybe someday, long after you're gone, someone will sit by a fire in a village whose name you never knew, and they'll tell a story. Maybe your story, or maybe just something close. A tale of how the world fell apart and somehow, impossibly, the people in it didn't. They'll say, there was a time everything broke, but the people bent, and then they built, and that will be enough. Good night, sleep well.